I see a red dot.
Okay, we're live. Okay, it's 6 o'clock on October 11th, 2022. I will call the regular board meeting of Lowell Light and Power to order. Charlie, if you will do a roll call.
All right, Chairman Beecham.
Here.
Vice Chair Schraben. Here. Board Member Cadwalder.
Here.
Board Member Fonger. Here. And Board Member Crawford is absent.
Okay, and he called in under the weather. So I would entertain a motion to excuse his absence.
I'll motion to excuse the absence of Neil.
Ordered. It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of the agenda. Any changes or anything?
No.
Then I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda as presented.
So moved.
Support.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Approval of the minutes from the September 13th, 2022 regular board meeting.
I'd like to motion to approve the minutes from the past board meeting.
I'll support.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carried. Public comment. We don't really, all we have is employees and board members and an outside guest. Peter, you got anything to say?
No, thank you.
Okay. You will in a minute.
Not yet.
Okay, we'll move on from public comment to action items. Number one, fiscal year 2022 audit presentation and acceptance. So Peter, you're up.
Thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Peter Hefner. I represent Benevolence, Hefner, the firm of certified public accountants that conducted your audit for the year ended June 30th, 2022. I brought some slides along just to take a look at how did you fare compared to the previous year and where did you end up compared to the previous years. But I wanted to point out, first of all, that we've provided our audit report. On page 1 of our audit report is our opinion, and it continues on to page 2. And in the second paragraph of our audit opinion, I'm going to summarize, it's our opinion that the financial statements present fairly in all material respects the financial position, results of operations, cash flows where applicable, of Lowell and Power for the year ended June 30th, 2022. And that's what I refer to as a clean opinion. There's a couple changes in the format and context of the statements this year. You adopted a new accounting principle that relates to leases, so you are displaying the lease of the facility next door or within this building, but on the other side of this wall, as a receivable and a deferred inflow, so equal amounts of approximately $850,000, which represents the entire term of the lease with extensions. And as you proceed, each year you'll recognize 1 year's worth of revenue. But on the financial statements, people that look from the outside can see that you have this additional asset that historically was not on your books. It's the result of implementing new accounting standards that require that be recorded on your books. In addition, we broke out, with the help of your management, we broke out separately from operating revenues those revenues associated where you respond to other communities and assist with putting power back to the customers. And so on the financial statement on page 9, it just shows mutual aid revenue separately from the cost of mutual aid. The direct costs, the indirect, are not separately displayed. And the thought was, that's not your primary mission. Your primary mission is this community. And when you go to another community to assist in an emergency situation, those are not your normal operating revenues. So let's show those separately and bring that to the attention of your rate calculators as well, so that they don't misunderstand that that's just my normal operating revenue. So Charlie and Megan talked with me during the audit process, and at the end we asked your staff to pull out those balances, and I think it makes logical sense just to show those separately. Should you go to Florida for 2 weeks or what have you, can make a significant difference on what's being displayed on the financial statements. So a nice improvement. Also, there was a prior period adjustment in the current year, and it was to reflect your asset retirement obligation. And we didn't realize, I think mutually, because your staff prepares all the information, that the liability you were displaying associated with asset retirement obligation associated with some of your ownership through MPPA, there was an offset side to it. So that offset side was not reflected on your financial statements in the past. So there's a liability, and then there's also, again, one of these deferred items, and that balance gets amortized over time as the plant gets to closure. And as that gets closer to closure, that balance will be amortized, but it added about $150,000 to equity at the beginning of the year. So we restated the beginning balance. Didn't impact your income the current year. So 3 new items.
Can I interrupt?
Yes.
So I just have one question.
Yes.
So, and it's more, so like this new, when you were talking about the lease and the money that's coming in and everything, and we have to report that differently than what we had in the past,
Yes.
requirements. Is that something that you, how do we know that? How does Megan know that? Is that something that you reflect to her
Yes.
on a routine basis? Or does Megan, do you get information from the state and the feds that say you gotta do? So I'm just curious of how that comes about.
So there is an accounting standards setting body called the Governmental Accounting Standards Board. They establish accounting standards, and you were just talking about they're almost up to number 100 now. But they typically, they will go out to the public for comment on a standard. They will look at critical issues related to changes in the accounting procedures, and then they will issue a standard with a due date. And so we typically will try to point those that are coming down the pike to your staff and say, this new one's coming along. So when we walked in this year, I think we'd already discussed it. They'd already prepared what needed to be prepared for it. But typically, we're always looking out 1 to 2 years, and even as far out as the standards go. This one was a little unique because this one, along with probably 7 others, were delayed by COVID. So these were out there, should have happened approximately COVID era, and they were all delayed. And so this is the first one that has implications for you probably in 4 years, I would think. But there are a number of other standards that we would typically talk to your staff about, maybe during audit planning or even before that point in time. And of course, they attend training too and can pick up on some of that. But we make a point of, I think this one might affect you.
I guess I'm getting at, one is, your service is not only just at the very end when you do the audit, it's, we're using your service, asking questions and everything year round?
I would say we definitely have contact multiple times in the year. There might be a couple months that we don't talk, or there might be, hey, we want to display something differently. It just depends on where you're at in your cycle, working on your budget, or maybe working with your rate consultant who might have comments. So we typically will talk to your staff, not just during the audit. We typically come before the audit for planning for a day as well. And then they'll email us and say, hey, we got this, or what do you think about that? And we definitely communicate.
Thanks.
And just for the board, if anybody wants a paper copy, I've got paper copies, but the digital copies were included in your board packet. So if you would like a paper copy, just let me know.
I'm going to jump to the slides just because it gives you more context. So here is a picture of your operating revenue and expense, including the payment in lieu of tax to the city. And you can see those yellow and blue bars have gotten closer than they've historically been. And you can see the item that seems to be growing would be the blue, which is the expenses, and that's really the cost of power. So if we take a look at the next slide, this slide is showing you where did the dollars go. Your largest cost is the cost of purchased power, And when I looked at this, I compare it year to year, and we compare it during the audit process as well. And the mix really hasn't changed, except for that green has gotten bigger. And we'll look at multiple years of expenses. So in the next slide, it's a little hard to see what's occurring in the items that are not purchase power, obviously, because purchase power is such a substantial portion of your operation. If we were to remove that, though, you can see things are very consistent year to year. But the purchase power, actually selling more power and the price was going down, and I was told I made a poor remark last year. Considering the power costs are going down, but we audited a number of electric utilities and cities with electric utilities, and that's a very consistent picture. Those organizations we've worked with typically have closed the coal plants, and now they're on the open market, maybe participating in MPPA, combustion turbine, and maybe weren't even early enough to get in on some of the other things like Campbell or Bell River. But the driver here is cost of power. The other items are very consistent. The next slide, this just shows where is the power coming from, and in 2020 we began to report upon those renewables. Previous to that, it was included in other. So it kind of looks a little jolty, but as those prior years fall off the graph, you can see to what extent are we getting those dollars through your direct purchases, MPPA, Campbell, Bell River, combustion turbine, and then we have that renewables, which you can see growing, and you know, just from the picture of the graph, you can see that you're meeting the requirements of the state for renewable purchases. This picture shows your net income, and you can see things do change over time. And some of this, over that period of time, we picked up, or your staff picked up, your asset retirement obligation associated with plant closures, where you have some ownership. And so that can change these numbers kind of substantially, but you know, 2022, its cost of power was a big driver here, and the rates. It's the whole formula that you work with, I'm sure, at every board meeting is, you know, how do we provide power at the most cost-effective manner to our citizens while maintaining a reliable system. So this is really graph one, just the differential between the revenues and the expenses and the payment in lieu of tax. And that's a summary of your balance sheet, your income statement, and we didn't touch upon your cash flows, but we can. And is that the last picture,
Yes.
or is there more?
No, that's the last one.
From my perspective, this is a very clean audit is what I would call it, because we come in and your staff has schedules prepared for everything electronically. We get them before we come sometimes. And they'll give us a list of here's what's in accounts payable, here's what's in every balance sheet account that you have on your financial statements, and backup for it. So if it's prepaid, we'll be able to see here's the bill that was paid, it's applicable to the next 9 months or whatever. And so it's a fairly tick and tie audit, technical to some extent, just because of those unusual things like an asset retirement obligation or the new lease issue, but quite straightforward. We will include this within the city's audit report as just a fund of the city. And following the financial statements are notes of the financial statements, and then in the back of the report you will find schedules that break down what are the costs of generation, what are the costs of operations and maintenance, or whatever it might be. Transmission distribution, so a lot of data there. Straightforward audit your staff has prepared. I don't think there was an adjustment during the audit process.
Don't think so.
So that's not a typical situation. Typically there's something, but not this year. So we appreciate your staff's willingness to get it all together, but also the ability, which costs you in training and things of that nature, but very technical people, so it's great to work with them, we appreciate it.
So,
That's kind of boring audit, right?
Boring audits are good from my side.
so, and your job in the audit is just to you know, to make sure that everything is on the up and up and this kind of thing.
Sure.
So, and I'm gonna put you on the spot and you'll find some political way to, so
Okay.
our staff, if you were comparing them to other communities that have public power, you would rate them up there at the top?
I would. Yeah, I think they do a really nice job. Typically, it's a little hard to compare just because many times the public power side of operations, they tend to have more higher end folks working with them. And where you find a community that might struggle with financial reporting and accounting might be a smaller community where they haven't put priority on, you know, hiring and training that quality of staff. So it's a tough competition because electric utilities are generally pretty well run.
So the other,
But I think your staff does a great job.
are there, and again, I briefly went through it, I didn't try to, I'm not an accountant, so I didn't try to go through line by line and think. Are there any areas that you think Lowell Light and Power that needs to improve on?
Sure. In addition to the audit, we provide a letter, which is our communications to the board. It talks about our responsibilities and your responsibilities. And we talk about significant estimates, identify whether there were disagreements, there were none. And that's where I would identify opportunities to improve. Most often, your system of internal controls. I didn't bring that to your attention. As part of your audit, we are required to identify and test the system of internal controls over financial reporting, so that would be cash receiving, accounts payable, payroll, the various processes that within the accounting cycle, I would say. And when we looked at the processes, we believe that they're appropriate and we tested them. We don't test them using a statistical sample because it's oftentimes easier for me to look at 12 payments to XYZ than to test controls with a sample of a large size. But the internal controls that we are aware of as part of the audit process are appropriate and appear to be functioning as designed.
Good.
As you had mentioned that, you know, we incur some expense for like the training to have our staff be as good as they are, but doesn't that result in net savings from just not having issues to deal with and?
Sure, and it lowers your audit costs and it results in you having accurate, timely financial information, which is super valuable. And other organizations don't necessarily get that because they may not get good information. And then it's difficult to make a good decision. So I think there is a cost-benefit relationship for sure. And it's apparent from what your folks are able to do. To me, based on what I've seen, is that they understand and know what's going on. And when there's a question, they'll ask it too, if there's something that they think maybe we could help with. So I don't think it's a bad thing that people get training. I think it's a good thing.
There's a section in here called investment and deposit risk.
Okay, yes.
And it says that the investment policy does not have specific limits in excess of state law on investment credit risk.
Yeah.
It basically says the other thing, same thing for the other two sections.
Yes, yes.
Would it behoove us to have anything? Is there anything that we could do?
Sure. So,
or should we, you know?
and I guess I would ask of staff, but I think your managing director, or what have you, has some input into what are we buying for securities, as do your fiscal staff, and making sound decisions. And typically what I see is most municipalities have adopted the state Public Act 20 guidance that says, here's what you can invest in. And they just said, the state said you need an investment policy, well, if that's what I can invest in, that's what I will do. I do have some customers where they will say, we're not gonna go for some of this, we'll just restrict it to, let's say, federal government securities. instead of allowing for buying Michigan government securities or what have you. But it's pretty rare. Most people are just sticking with, you can buy any of this. I would suggest to you that you should be aware of what they own. And management should understand the risk associated with the securities. I'm not an investment guy, and I know I haven't done good lately. To some extent, what's allowable on here, the state has kind of limited your risk.
Yeah, when we look at making investments, your custodial risk is basically default on the counterparty. We invest heavily in mortgage-backed securities, so that's principal protected. There's two options on mortgage-backed security. There's guaranteed principal and non-guaranteed principal. We actually had a conversation with another bank maybe a year and a half ago, and decided not to pursue any options with them because the principal wasn't guaranteed. So they're all Ginnie Mae's. Yeah, they're all basically when you issue a mortgage, the government ultimately buys them from your mortgage companies, and that's what we're investing in. Or we'll talk a little bit later about treasury bonds right now. We just bought a chunk of one-year treasury bonds. We all have much bigger problems if the treasury defaults on that obligation.
Right,
So
That's the full faith and credit of the federal government to make payments.
yeah. So we're very cautious. So yes, we technically have that custodial risk, but we're very involved in.
And the custodial credit risk is really the risk that where you buy it, let's say you're going through a bank, UBS or whoever it may be, that they will take your security. That's the custodial credit risk. Then you have some interest rate risk because let's say you have the risk of 3% security you purchase and the rate goes to 5, if the market value goes down, you hold it to maturity, you're still whole. So you have that, and then you have credit risk, which would be the risk of that organization not repaying you. And typically what you have are the highest rated AAA, and if it's the federal government backing the full faith and credit, like a Ginnie Mae or specific federal government agency securities, there's no need to disclose a credit risk because it's assumed it's the highest. So like a treasury, you really generally accepted accounting principles don't even require you to say it's a AAA or the highest rated.
We can take this up, another time if you want to.
Megan and I have actually talked about at a future board meeting, we'd like to do just a board training on our investments and how, what are we invested in? There's some dollars that I'd like to share, on, especially recently. And I'll give spoiler alert, we invested $250,000 at 4.15% on a one-year treasury bond. It's unheard of. And we're looking at, we only did a 1 year because the 2 year jumped up like 5, 10, 15 basis points, something pretty small. And the feds have indicated continued upward rate pressure through next year. So this treasury bond will be callable or whatever the appropriate term is, to be returned to us a year from now. And we'll have we're hoping to have another opportunity to reinvest at potentially an even greater return on investment in a year. Obviously, there's no confidence in anybody's foresight into what the markets are going to do, but the feds have indicated that, and the recent job data, or the recent jobs reports indicated that the economy can still withstand quite a bit, withstand a pretty significant rate increase. I think feds are calling for at least one more 75 basis point increase and some other 20s. And that's not a direct reflection of what your treasury bonds are going to do, but it's a general barometer of where returns are at.
Thank you. Thank you. Other questions?
No, I would, unless somebody else, I would entertain a motion to accept the fiscal year 2022 audit.
So moved.
Supported.
It's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carried. Okay, you can stick around, Peter, we tried to drag it out for 3 or 4 hours, but.
I heard that.
I heard that. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good job. Thank you, Pete.
You're welcome.
Once again, Megan. We do have a dream team here.
I was gonna say, I can't say enough about the work that they did for a second year in a row. I was not in the audit, or in the office for the audit this year. I told them I was just gonna stop, I'm gonna plan vacations that week because they don't need me here, which this year wasn't a vacation, I was stuck at home with a family full of COVID.
Oh, that's.
But I will commend them for just doing an awesome job. I talked to Peter that week and talked to Kate, I think I forgot her name, who was kind of the lead on-site person, and everything went very smooth, as Peter reflected.
Okay, action item D.
All right, sorry. Oh, closer to. There we go. All right, so over the last couple months, given periodic updates on a demand response program. So what you have included in your board packet is what we call a rate rider. It's not its own electric rate itself. It's just a basically an add-on. It's kind of an extra that can be added to certain rates, and all it really does is a board adoptance that ultimately opens the availability of the program. To be honest with you, the actual rate rider doesn't do much more than that. It sets some very basic parameters and then establishes a requirement to identify or to develop an individual contract for any customer that wants to participate. So thought we would, before I asked the board to take action on this, I thought it'd be good to do a little board training session on what is a demand response program, a little bit of background. I don't want to take for granted. It's not all that complicated of a concept, I guess, framework, but the detail, the devil's in the detail, like everything. So we'll jump right in. But so demand response basics. Essentially, a demand response program is a program designed for customers that have the ability to reduce their electric load on demand. And essentially, a customer reducing their electric load reduces our system load, reduces the overall grid load. So because of that, it provides grid support, just like our generators back here. MISO can call on those to, and I guess I should just as a refresher, MISO is the Mid-Continent Independent System Operator. They're our regional transmission operator. They're the air traffic controller, directing where power flows and what generation resources kick online, and they manage the power flow in the region highlighted on the map. But so to MISO, a demand response program is another opportunity, and it provides value to Lowell Light and Power as a registered load modifying resource. Load modifying resource is essentially a resource that is dispatchable to impact the overall load of the system. So somewhat self-explanatory, but how it actually works is a little less intuitive. But ultimately the goal is, if we can reduce our overall system load at desired times, there's a value to us, there's a value to the customer, there's a value to the overall grid. So that's what this program is geared toward. So how it works, again, the goal is to identify electric loads that can reliably be shed during MISO emergency events. That's it. That's a key. And just like our generators back here can be dispatched at when MISO requires us to for grid support, we could call, if we had a customer in a demand response program that signed up for a megawatt of load shed, we can call them up and say, hey, just like our generators in 4 hours, we need you to shed a megawatt of load, and you need to keep it off the grid for 4 hours, or whatever the duration is. That's overall, that's essentially the same thing as us turning on a megawatt of generation. If you can remove a megawatt of load, it essentially has the same balancing effect. But since we can register a demand response program with MISO, we have the opportunity to actually qualify for zonal resource credits, which is our capacity requirement. You hear us talking about capacity, we get 4.6 megawatts of capacity from this asset and 2.4 from this asset. We're typically think of capacity as assets that we own that we can turn on. This is kind of the reverse of that. We don't own it, but it's an asset through a contract that would require somebody to turn something off, essentially having that same net effect to the overall grid. So again, to MISO, demand response provides a very similar benefit as a generation resource coming online, which is ultimately why we can qualify for zonal resource credits. But also with one of the reasons on timing, why we're looking at it now is obviously we have retirements coming up. We're looking at ceasing coal operations no later than 2028 at this point. So that will leave a pretty significant deficiency in a short position in our capacity position. So this is a tool in the toolbox to improve that capacity position. The forward curves on MISO Zone 7, which is the lower peninsula, shows that as these baseload resources are being taken offline, replaced with more intermittent, non-dispatchable renewable resources, we're seeing that capacity market and the value of capacity go up. We recently found out that MISO announced essentially the ceiling for capacity is going up due to inflationary pressures. It's based on what they call the cost of new entry, or CONE, what it would cost somebody to bring a new asset online. And that's the ceiling for your capacity market. So with tightening of the capacity market, inflationary pressures, we're seeing the cost of capacity continue to go up. There's some additional layers of complexity that we'll talk about a little bit later, but ultimately, that's how the program works. We receive a benefit from improved capacity hedge position, and then why would the customer do it? There's a financial incentive. We would ultimately pay them, just like if we had to go out on the open market to procure capacity, we would be paying some counterparty for capacity on the market. We can essentially purchase capacity from one of our customers. So requirements, ultimately there needs to be about a 0.5 megawatt of load reduction, and that's just, we want to make sure that the value of the program and the value of a participant is significant enough that it's worth the administrative costs associated with it. They're required to shed load for 4 hours with a 6-hour notification time. So they would get up to 6 hours heads up, basically, that hey, in 6 hours you need to drop a 0.5 megawatt, a megawatt, whatever they've subscribed to. And because it's associated with MISO emergency events, there's no option to pay your way through. It's a reliability structure. A lot of your demand response incentive programs are more financially driven to help the utility control their costs. So there's typically an opportunity in those programs to buy your way through an event. But since this is for grid support, if you're called on, there is no option not to perform. And then it talks about the number of times, and the number of times that a entity could be called on for demand response is kind of, I don't say shocking, but it's a surprise to start with, because it could ultimately happen 16 times a year. That's really disruptive. But since it's based on established MISO emergency standards, which are regulated by the North American Energy Reliability Council, I think that's right, isn't it, Casey? NERC?
Yes.
Yeah, I would say, it's industry standards that dictate this. Once a year, they would have to test, so they would have to, there's a bunch of parameters, and the devil's in the detail again, where we would monitor, and because we have such detailed AMI interval data, we're able to very accurately test, and they ultimately just need to prove that, yes, I was at 2 megawatts and ran continuously for 2 hours, and then the 1 hour test is we turned off a megawatt worth of load, and that meter data would reflect that ability to shed load, basically just a verification process. And then there's just pre-deployment, deployment communications, processes, procedures. It's such because it's related to grid reliability, visibility into availability is very important for MISO. So it creates a need to talk with our customers. So hypothetically, factory B typically runs at 2 megawatts. If they're shut down for planned maintenance and their effective load at any given time is 0, well, they don't have that ability to shed a megawatt anymore because they've already shed everything. Well, to MISO, all they look at is what resources can we call on. So if a resource is not available, we need to make sure that those processes are or there are processes in place to make sure that information gets transmitted to MISO, which ultimately directs the traffic. We do the same thing with our generators. If Casey goes on vacation, he puts them in planned outage. MISO, that information gets reflected, it's entered into an MPPA portal. MPPA portal has constant communication with MISO's control center, and at that, when he puts those in planned outage, now MISO knows I can't count on that 7-ish megawatts that's sitting at Lowell, they're offline. Similar process would need to happen in a DR program. So this has been done in a partnership with MPPA. We work very closely with some of their executive staff and subject matter experts to develop a presentation to understand the parameters. Ryan and I led this up for Light and Power, and Tom Weeks and Bob Lalonde from MPPA. And really what we're doing is leaning on their expertise. They have managed LMRs, which is a load modifying resource, for years. They've helped manage ours in terms of communications with MPPA, all the testing requirements. So everything would be facilitated through MPPA. Granted, this is a newer program for MPPA, but we were identified as a utility that could potentially benefit from this because we have such a large percentage of our generation portfolio set to retire in the next decade, less than a decade at this point. So this is kind of why we got targeted for their pilot program, and MPPA knows that we're a pretty progressive utility willing to get out there and I don't want to say lead the charge because this is not a new structure by any means, but it's new to MPPA. But they have LMR processes, they have, kind of all the back end stuff ready to go and ready to assist with a member deploying a DR program. So we did meet with an industrial customer here in town. MPPA staff joined us for that. We had a great conversation. Ryan was there, Lisa was there, and we're still exploring whether or not it's a good fit for them. Based on the load reduction requirements, potential disruptions, it's got to be the right fit for the right company, and they have to have the value proposition just has to be there to make sense, and that's definitely gonna be a challenge, especially with some of the supply chain issues creating hurdles to potential disruption. So it's definitely a right fit for the right customer, but it's a program that we felt was necessary to explore just because we need all the tools in our tool bag we can get to filling our short capacity position in the future.
So when you're,
Nope, sorry, go ahead.
so when you're saying that, is it, so you've talked to an industrial customer. Can they opt, I mean, can they opt out? I mean, so if Lowell Light and Power says, we're gonna do this, then be damned if they don't wanna partake, they have to partake?
No,
Or,
that-
I mean,
That's where the contract comes into play. This is a contractual obligation, this is a contractual agreement with a customer if they want to participate. It's an opportunity for them to evaluate, is this payment worth the potential, is this cost reduction in our power supply worth the potential for being required to shed load?
so this is not something, like, if we agree on, this is not something that we're forcing down
No.
somebody's throat?
That's why it's a rate rider, it's an optional program.
Okay,
We talked to one customer and they said, plain and simple, this doesn't work for our operation. We can't, it's too damaging and it would basically
so
shut the whole
so if
operation
we
down.
adopt this, then it's not the final say, you have to get, it's an optional thing for the consumer or the,
Yeah, and ultimately that final contract would come before the board for board approval and all the specifics. And that's why we did a rate rider, and it's very broad. Hey, this is available if you'd like to participate. If you don't, it's irrelevant. If you do, let's talk. And one size might not fit all because there's a risk reward proposition. If we're gonna shoulder more of that non-performance risk, the value to us goes down. If they're gonna shoulder more of the risk, the value goes up. We can pay them more based on, so that's why there's an individual relationship and the details have to be spelled out in an individual contract with a customer. But this is no requirement, this is purely to create availability.
okay?
So next step, open program availability with the rate rider. So it's just, that's all it does, is it opens up the availability. There's no requirement, there's nothing. It's just if this is the right fit for you and this is the right fit for us and we can agree on a value proposition to say X number of dollars per kW month for your ability to shed load, then there's value there for us because we can register it as a zonal resource credit and it can improve our capacity position.
What's the advantage to the person that's shedding the load?
Money. It's a financial transaction for them. It would be a bill credit essentially. Hypothetically, Cone right now is about, we'll call them nice round numbers because I'm not nearly as good at math as Steve. We'll call it $8 a kW month. If you can shed a megawatt, that's $8,000 a month that's worth to, if we had to go onto the market and procure that. So that's $8,000 a month, $96,000 a year. So, and there's a big number.
So there's an advantage for both of us?
Yes, that's that relationship of we get to claim zonal resource credits, improve our capacity position, it goes towards our reliability requirement with MISO. They reduce their overall electric expense by what, and that's where there's not just the value of capacity on the forward market. If they shed load, it's presumably at an emergency period, which means the market prices for, spot prices for power at that time are going to be very elevated. So there's actually additional savings for us as a utility on not buying, kind of counterintuitive, but not buying power that's more expensive than our retail rate. actually helps all of our customers because it helps eliminate some of the upward pressure on the PCA because we're not going to be buying power at that highest price period. I don't think there'll be a ton of system-wide impacts there, but it's a value proposition for us and for the customer, and that's where they just need to decide. Customers essentially need to decide, is X number of dollars a year worth the potential disruption? And I'll go back to here. While it could be 16 times a year, MISO's only we've only been called on here. So I guess I'll go back. A customer would be expected to shed load at the same time we would be expected to fire up our generators back here. So that's only happened 2 times in the history of MISO. Granted, it's been 2 times in the last 3 years. So we're not making any projections on how often it could be, but that's that roll of the dice for the customer is if this year, 2022, there's been 0 events. So every customer would love to sign up for everything.
I was gonna, okay, so I think I know the answer to this. It's probably obvious, but I could be mistaken, so I'm just gonna ask the question. Okay, so if we sign up with somebody and they get that credit of, is that a potential credit of $96,000 a year, or is that just they're there being paid as that resource no matter what? Even if they don't ever cut capacity, we're paying them that $96,000 a year
Yeah.
too.
Which it wouldn't be that high, but yes. I said just like here, we get paid, if Casey never fires them up,
Right.
we get paid for them
Yeah.
by MISO. There's a capacity value. We either get paid from an avoided cost standpoint, and we didn't go to the market to procure that capacity, or if we have a long position, which we have now, we monetize it through the planning reserve auction. And right now it's at cone, so it's at the maximum value.
Cone.
Cost of new entry, sorry. More acronyms.
Well,
So-
and I kind of lose them sometimes.
Yeah.
They leak out somewhere. I don't know.
Fair enough. Most things that we have acronym dictionaries in that. So again, the next steps are going to be just to continue the conversations with customers. It's got to be the right fit. If they don't have the ability to shed that much load, or it essentially cripples their operation, some customers for 6 hours notice, great. Sign us up, we'll shut you got to switch to close things down. I had a customer previously that was on a 15-minute notice, and they're on an interruptible rate, 15 minutes, they dropped 5 megawatts. In about 15 minutes, we installed a switch on a pole, kind of like Casey has that connect the generators to the grid, and it was before my time. It was wrapping up as I was there, but if they get called on, you'd see somebody run out of their office, sometimes at a sprint, to get to the switch and shut everything off. It was, the value proposition worked for them, and it shut down 15 buildings. It was a campus. Why they agreed to it, I don't know, but that seemed extreme. We're not going that extreme. 6 hour notice is usually a little more accommodatable, but with the supply chain issues, the potential disruption is very much a real concern for some manufacturers. So other thing to consider with this is it's not just for our current economic situation with supply chain issues and inflation and rapid, there's been rapid growth. This is something that would just be a tool in the toolbox. So maybe 5 years from now, before anybody participates, we may never get anybody to participate. We may have somebody that calls us up 2 weeks from now and says, that's a great program, we got the perfect fit. So we'll figure that, we'll work through that. If a customer does want to participate, Rate Rider requires that an individual contract be developed. That contract would come before the board for final approval, and would determine the specifics. So it would determine what they're going to get paid. It would determine punitive measures and who was responsible for them in an event of non-performance. And then that ultimately leads into a risk-reward position that would need to be established. And again, the contract would be approved by the Light and Power Board. So that's kind of DR basics, I guess. Like I said, in your packet is a rate rider, and it's my recommendation to approve draft policy 4-17 demand response program rider. And that's up here, and like you see, it's linked and it's only available to our larger commercial and industrial customers, just because they're the only ones that are big enough to participate.
So,
That makes it worth the while, right? 'Cause
Yeah.
asking a homeowner to do this wouldn't really benefit the grid, so to speak.
And we're working, so to that, a lot of people are familiar with thermostat programs or water heater programs. That's the residential version of this, and MPPA is looking at residential demand response options. Those programs are very tech-driven, because it's gotta be automated.
Right.
So that the process is in place, so it makes it a much better fit to be aggregated at a state agency level, so, they amortize the expenses over multiple members. So we are looking, and they're looking more, leading the charge up on a similar program, but for residential, and I think they're still pretty early on in their evaluation. It's a pretty complex structure.
So can these requests be, they're not, so if somebody signs up to have 500 megawatt or kilowatts, load that's gonna be, turned off, could we call them, say, can you turn off 200? Or is it always gonna be 500 every time?
It will be whatever's registered with MISO. So like
So MISO will only call and say they want it all. They're never gonna call and say, can you give us half?
the only time they would call for other incremental steps is in a load shed event, and by the time we reach a firm load shed event, they've exhausted every other resource. Load shed's essentially rolling blackouts. That's when they call and say, we need you to do rolling blackouts as a utility of X number of KW, X number of
Yeah, that's
megawatts.
different than this.
But very different. So yeah, we would, if somebody registered for 500, MISO would be anticipating 500, and they'd say, we're deploying LMR resources, just like Casey registers ours, and ours are a little different because there's environmental factors that influence the,
How much they can generate.
I don't say, you and Casey understand, I don't necessarily, understand why it's important, not the calculations.
so is there, I guess what I'm hearing, there seems to be, is there any downside of approving this? I mean, I don't hear any,
It's just something we have to manage would be,
Yeah, it's something for us to manage. The downside would be if we couldn't, the downsides would be determined in the contract and what that value is. But really, it's just another tool in our toolbox. So I take that back. The only downside that I've identified as a risk that I think is worth taking is right now we hedge our open capacity position 4 planning years out. So if, like, I transacted a couple weeks ago, a month ago, I don't remember exactly when it was, but bought small snippets of capacity 4 and 5 years out. Nobody's gonna sign a 5-year contract. So our hedge window becomes a little narrower, so the downside would be if we had a customer that pulled the rug out from under the program right at the last minute. I think we can resolve those issues in a contract too. We can create notice periods, but there's some level of risk, and the level of risk isn't the full value of the contract, it's just the delta between the value of the contract and what we have to go out to the market and procure from the market. So, if we were counting on getting capacity at $6 a kW a month through this, somebody pulls the rug out from under the program and we've got to go out and transact, all right, we may be at $8 a kW a month. So it may cost us money in that delta, or that difference between what we would have paid them and what we need to go get it for. But again, it's going to play a pretty small role in our overall capacity position. that it's just it's a good, I won't call it icing on the cake, but again, it's another tool in the toolbox to say, it's not gonna be our only thing, but there's some value in diversification of your capacity. We're in a position right now where we're heavily dependent on 2 coal-fired resources for capacity, and we're gonna be losing those. So the more you diversify across your capacity resources, the more, it's easy if somebody pulls a 0.5 megawatt out. It's real tough to lose 6 megawatts for us. So there are downsides. I don't want it to say, hey, nothing can possibly go wrong. And that's the one that I've honed in on, and we've talked with MPPA quite a bit, or I have, about, what can we do to manage that risk? And there's a certain level of acceptance of needing to just accept a certain level of risk, which we have inherent risks in our capacity anyways. Again, more spoiler alerts for the riveting conversation we'll get to in the next couple months is MISO is changing their capacity structure to a seasonal structure. And if you have a resource that's in a planned outage or a forced outage, so if something goes wrong, it's forced to go offline, and that resource is offline for 30 days inside of a window, that next year in that same season, you don't get your same capacity accreditation for that resource. So we always have a risk of seasonally losing or losing pieces of our capacity position due to things completely out of our control. I would layer this in under that bucket and say, at any given time, there are inherent risks of owning generation assets or load modifying resources that could change your position.
So are we managing this, or is this being managed through MPPA?
I'd say both, kind of like our assets back here, the 2 turbines. Casey manages the assets, manages the program, but in conjunction with MPPA. MPPA is the actual interface with MISO. So technically at the MISO level, the relationship is between MISO and MPPA. So there's a certain level of management there, but then there's also a relationship between MPPA and Lowell Power, and there's shared management there as well. So it's just carving up the pie.
So Casey will facilitate part of this?
No, and I'm just using Casey as an example because it's a generation, because his generation assets are similar. It would be, there's very little ongoing management of the program.
So MPPA will tell us that you guys hit your mark.
Yeah, I mean, MPPA
They
would
would
call,
tell us.
yeah, they would call,
That
just,
you're there.
yeah, just like they issue. So what we would manage is, and some of it would be determined in an individual contract, is managing the communication to the customer, but there's options for the customer to get direct notifications from MPPA or direct notifications from MISO. So some of it can be self-managed by the actual customer, but it would involve accounting staff from a billing standpoint and bill credits and the financial structure. Ryan's been involved because it's really a distribution asset, and Ryan is involved with understanding their, our industrial customers' processes. Lisa would be involved from a key account standpoint and managing that relationship. So there's a lot of different components to it that would kind of be spread out amongst, and then I would be very involved just from it being a new product.
So as far as we know, there's a lot of moving parts, but do you know of another power place that already has this in place and you can understand what all the moving parts are at right now?
Well, that's what MPPA is for, to be honest with you. But this is not a new program, a new structure.
I thought it was.
No, it's new to us, but Lansing's got it in place. There's interruptible rates all over the place. That's typically what they're called, is interruptible rates. But I've managed.
My understanding is that IOU utilities have
Oh, yeah.
utilized that more than public
Yes, absolutely.
power
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I've managed other interruptible rates elsewhere, different structures. It's all about just knowing.
So the DR rate calculation and this whole program is already in place and up and running, and everybody seems to be happy?
It's on a customer by customer basis.
Okay.
I mean, if it's a good, if it's a good fit for the, honestly,
Right.
if somebody gets called on to be to be interrupted and it happens at a bad time,
Yeah,
they focus on what's right in front of them, but the value is there, and it's a transparent process the whole time. They understand. A lot of this information that was in the slides is exactly what was shared with
Okay.
the customer, so it would be as a not-for-profit utility, we can be very, very transparent with our customers. It's not about making a dollar, it's about,
And this is strictly for industrial customers or
commercial industrial, large customers. Anybody that has the ability, it's really available to anybody over 500 kW. So, some other utilities have targeted large operations with on-site generators. The problem with generators is you get into EPA rules, difference between a emergency standby generator and a production generator. There's different air quality permitting, but yeah, I mean, it's available to anybody that essentially has the ability to shed enough load to make it worth our time.
So have you had any discussions, obviously with one you've had, an industrial customer, and currently we have 7 industrial customers, and how many commercial? 200?
But not all of them qualify, because it's down, we really only have about 10, 12, 15 customers, somewhere in that range, over 500 kW.
Yeah, probably around there.
Yeah, so it's a pretty small subsection of our customers. That's why it's not something that we're gonna get this inrush of, we've got 30 people lining up and it's gonna just overload the staff. It's gonna be 1, 2, at any given point, I would never anticipate more than a handful of participants. There's a large municipal that we've worked with in understandings, programs, and they don't have anybody currently participating.
So if somebody decides to participate, are there, and you might have already said, but time frame that they have to sign up and they have to commit for? I mean, so that all of a sudden they go, I guess I'm looking at, are there penalties? So if somebody says, yeah, I want to be a part of it, and they're 6 months into it, and they're going, oh no, I don't want to be a part of it anymore, are there penalties? Are there, I mean, we're committing numbers to MPPA, I mean, so how does all that play?
I hate to,
I'm sorry.
no, I hate to constantly lean on it, but the answer's in the contract. And it would be structured that, at a minimum, they would have to commit to a planning year. Everything MISO does is in a planning year, which is June 1st, or no, May 1st. I can't remember if it's a May 1st start date or June 1st. I think it's a May 1st start date, isn't it?
I think it's,
Or is it June through May?
because June, July, August is the first.
Yeah, sure, yeah, June, so they would need to, so yes, there's specific timelines where all LMRs have to be registered with MISO by, Casey knows better than I do, February. I think it's into February.
No, it's actually, I think the fall before.
It's later than that.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's later now, but yeah, there's certain timelines on when a resource would have to be registered with MISO. There's testing requirements have to go through that, so there's all this preliminary work that would make it, that would essentially qualify it to receive zonal resource credits, and then they would have to commit for that entire planning year. And that's why it's gotta be the right fit. There is no, because it's a grid stability, grid reliability program, being a load modifying resource that's only callable in an emergency situation, there is no option not to perform. And there are penalty mechanisms in place.
So, now, taking that as a step further, somebody does default on their contract, who would legally be pursuing them would you know what I'm saying? Lowell Light and Power, or Lowell Light, or both?
It wouldn't necessarily be a legal pursuit,
Okay.
because there's financial mechanisms in place that would keep us whole as a utility. There's penalties that MISO has schedules available, same as if MISO calls on our resources and they don't show up.
Well,
But even if they refuse to pay the penalties, you know?
They can't.
They
There is no, just like,
Okay.
I hate to be this way, we wouldn't do it, but we have all the authority.
Right.
If they want their lights on, they would essentially be in default of their electric service. And I would
which-
want, and I would,
Okay.
That's the,
That's the
that's the axe that nobody wants to swing.
Yeah, but that is worst case scenario, and we'd probably never ever get there.
Yeah, that's, but we would be prepared to pursue that amount. We would have to bill out the customer for, and it essentially, I don't remember, the penalties are really high. You've got to procure all that power. They would be responsible for, I don't want to speak on the penalty. The financial penalties do not afford somebody the opportunity to not perform. And that's why it's got to be the right fit, and why we don't have just a set one-size-fits-all contract for anybody that wants to participate. It's what works for you. And again, if they're willing to take on more of the risk, then we can pay them more. If we have to take on more of the risk, and there's an equilibrium that you just have to get comfortable, I don't want to say get comfortable with, but, you know.
So if we,
are any of these scenarios set up where we would actually control the shutting off?
That, broken right, that would be determined in a contract. I would say no. Initially, I wouldn't be opposed to it, if hypothetically, and what I've seen happen elsewhere is we could put a 3-phase recloser up, tie it directly into our fiber system and have SCADA control of a device, and we could physically disconnect them from the grid. If it was a full facility, if they wanted to pay for those system upgrades but with a 6-hour notification time, they should have no issue responding in 6 hours if they're gonna commit. You know, for one, they need to be operational at the time to shed loads. So, yeah, I wouldn't say never, but it's highly unlikely that we would have that level of control. So we could.
Yep.
so have you done any kind of study or, how many customers you think might want to participate? Have you had any discussions with anybody, or?
Right now, it's a tough fit. The value of capacity is high, but the risks of being disrupted for some are pretty significant. And things are gonna change as well with seasonally accredited capacity. So yes, Ryan and I have looked, it's a tough fit. I don't wanna say names of customers, but I think there's 4 to 5 current customers that are worth having conversations with, and there's some customers that are, once they either expand or get fully operational, that we'll want to follow up with other conversations on.
So I guess this would also help at least keep having this option would be something they could think about as they, update their facility at some point in the future. They might say, hey, maybe we could take advantage of this if we incorporate this into our process. And
that's one of the reasons I'd like to have a rate rider on the books, is it changes the way people develop projects.
Yeah.
I'll use King Milling because they've announced a $42.5 million project. I don't think it necessarily is directly compatible, but you see somebody, what if it cost them an extra $100,000 to automate some process, and the value through a DR program is a 2-year payback? They may say, let's sign up for 5 years, guarantee an ROI, dump money into an automation process or a redundancy, or change out, instead of buying one big something, we can buy 2 small somethings that work in conjunction, whether it's air compressors, boilers, chillers, whatever,
Or even our own battery backup.
or battery backup.
Yeah.
There's DER, distributed energy resources, that can potentially be used. Thinking even further, you go to, this is down the road, but you go to vehicle to grid stuff at a residential level. Similar, you get into DERs and your ability to use DERs to shape your load. It becomes about sending the right price signal and making a value proposition that encourages a change in behavior.
So in your opinion, is there a downside to us, Lowell Light and Power, and/or our customers if we approve this? What I'm hearing is it's not changing our operation as much as it's giving an opportunity for our ratepayers that if the need becomes necessary to reduce that, it can beneficially, monetarily assist that customer.
So
Both sides really.
Yeah, I'll oversimplify things. And I don't know much about laying floor, so I'm going to try to dabble into your world. So you've got this truck, and you're doing a tile job, and you can bring an electric wet saw, you can bring a scribe, or some other third way of cutting the tile that I don't understand. So you say, there's a cost to bringing all three, but to me, there's a lot more upsides to having the option. The only cost is you got to carry an extra tool on your truck. It takes up space. Theoretically, it lowers your gas mileage. There's pieces of it that are downsides, but if you need it, aren't you glad you had it? Type of thing. It's an option. We've got to be considerate about administrative burden. There's a downside to the administrative burden of this. Somebody could pull out from the program at a really bad time that leaves us slightly exposed to capacity markets. But all the upsides of, man, this fills a need, and it's an option to fill a need. It's not the only way we're going to fill a short capacity position. Now, if we were looking at trying to fill 6 megawatts through demand response, I'd say there's a major downside in that, for one, we're not diversified in our capacity position, and it's highly unlikely, so why waste the time? And this is still relatively unlikely. I don't want to say that we've got somebody beating down our door, but the conversations that we've had, it's also something that manufacturers look for. We're not plowing new ground. We're not reinventing the wheel and trying to sell.
It gives our customers another option.
And they have the control about it. Like when we met with the customer, they were extremely familiar because they've done this at another facility elsewhere. So sometimes, especially as you mentioned in an expansion, you'll see people do an expansion and start to look for programs like this, especially if they multiple facilities. If they only have one facility and they're on our system, they may not know different, but if you think about some of our, I'll use Meyer as an example. Meyer's got stores in how many different electric systems, so if they found it works someplace, they're gonna know, oh, that type of program works. There's different ways of carving up the pie and getting a similar program, different utility, different structure. They'll start to know, ooh, a 6-hour window is attractive. Ooh, 6-hour notification is attractive. We bailed out of this program over in town XYZ because it was only a 1-hour notice and that wasn't enough. So their industrial customers are looking for programs like this, especially as there's inflationary pressures driving up the cost of everything. So there are
This is a win, almost like 100%, well, win-win situation. Like the downsides are just so infinitesimal. It's just,
the biggest downside right now is that Ryan and I've spent quite a bit of time doing this, and if we don't ultimately ever ever get a customer, I won't say the time's wasted, because there's value in just having it available. You know, our customers are looking for us, and again, it may
And just being prepared.
being prepared, and so, you know, even the amount of time that we've spent is not lost and I think Ryan and I are both more knowledgeable about MISO, how, you know, just you start to get involved and learn about very specific pieces, so.
Okay, I will, open it up, for a motion, to adopt policy 417.
So moved.
I'll support.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried.
All right, more exciting stuff. We will talk pension funding a little bit. So I mentioned previously that when we got our calendar year 2021 MERS valuation study, we found out that we had our hybrid division was funded to 138% funding level. It's overfunded by $109,000. So Julie and I started working with MERS just to understand what implications that had. What options do we have? How can we best use this money? What opportunities do we have to shift and maximize the value of that overfunding? So I've got a presentation that we'll jump to. The only thing I will highlight is that MERS does not require local governing body approval. So this is kind of, there's no.
How come I keep getting a little Megan shot up there? Huh?
She's smiling.
I keep getting a little.
That's her background. I like it. Yeah, Wilder's hanging out. Wilder's just hanging out. Wants everybody to smile. But this doesn't require local governing body approval. So this is just a conversation, no action item. But again, I'll touch on it in the presentation. With this being a significant strategic objective, want to provide the board an opportunity to provide feedback prior to doing anything with these funds. So just draw your attention, this is pulled directly from the valuation study, and you can see that that 01 division is funded to 59%, has a $2.5 million unfunded liability. That's not what we're looking for. But we're making great improvements there. The HA division, or the hybrid division, which is now closed, finished the year with an overfunded amount of $109,814. So that's what we're talking about today. So essentially what we did is we asked MERS to show us an estimate of what, and that's what the watermark is. I pulled this from their report. But essentially show us a scenario where if we left that money sit there, what would the next 20 years look like? If we moved it out of that fund and moved it into the recently created surplus division that you all voted on earlier in the spring, we established a surplus division. If we moved those funds to the surplus division, where would we be? So essentially, obviously there's an arrow there, I'll draw your attention to that. This is if, the baseline is if we leave those funds there. So what you can see is, these are, and over here is our annual required annual minimum contributions to MERS to this specific division. Not all, this is exclusively looking at the hybrid division. You know, right now you can see that, well, we'll go back. Previous 1 year, we were making $36,000-ish a year in contributions to the hybrid division. If we leave those funds there, we essentially get the equivalent of a financial firecracker. For the next 5 years, we get to save $10,000 a year, roughly. Well, that's good money, but in the grand scheme of things, when we're trying to fund a $2.5 million unfunded liability, is it the best thing to do to save $10,000 for 5 years essentially? Or do we find a way to move and keep a consistent contribution level, which have been baked into our budgets since the start of the hybrid division, so it's not a new expense. It's just, do we want to realize this financial firecracker for 5 years and save $10,000 a year? Didn't seem very attractive to us when the goal was to expedite the overall funding. And if there's any questions about mechanics or anything, I can try to concisely answer them, but there may be, pension funding is a,
So when we're looking at this hybrid, how many, we have a group of people that join in the hybrid?
anybody hired between 9/1/2012 and the closing of all pensions, so whenever we adopted the defined contribution plan, and I don't have those numbers in front of me. And I'm seeing a whole lot of shaking heads on the other end of the table.
I'm trying to think of what Jeremy,
Jeremy is not hybrid.
he's not.
I'll say, so as of about 2 years ago, so it's about an 8-year window, we'll call it. I'm not 100% sure where that fell.
But, so can you take this money that we've overfunded and move it?
Oh, thanks for teeing me up.
But what I'm thinking is, because it's overfunded by this group of people, I would think you can't take that money and help
I will,
a different group.
if you will entertain,
I'll entertain anything.
if you'll entertain me, we will get to that, because we do have flexibility. Here's our plan for the overfunding and what we want to do with it. Essentially, we are allowed to move funds, so MERS only cares, MERS doesn't even really care what our funding level is. MERS cares about this number right down here. Well, if you'll notice, that includes us, the city, our hybrid division, the city's surplus division, and now, since this valuation, since the board adopted a surplus division, moving beyond, there'll be a second surplus division that is linked directly to the O1 division and the HA division. So all MERS cares about is that bottom number.
So is the HA, is that only our employees?
Yes.
Or that's not the city's
That's Light
employees?
and Power's hybrid, that's Light and Power's hybrid plan.
And we've overpaid, or have a surplus or overfunded currently 109,000.
Correct. Yeah.
So my question is, do you have to keep that?
The only limitation is it has to stay with MERS. We couldn't say, send us a check for $109,000. That's essentially the only limitation.
Can we pump the brakes on our contribution to that fund?
So that's what they're doing here. If we leave the money there, it naturally bakes in, and over 5 years, they would erode that away, which would reduce our contributions over the next 5 years. That's not the strategic direction the board has chosen to go in, and quite frankly, to save $10,000 a year, it's,
Okay.
So I'm trying to get it, I mean, I don't, sorry I sound
no,
so
this
stupid.
is fun.
But this 109,000 was contributed by the people, a set of group people that are in the hybrid.
I get, this is our funds. This is our contribution.
What low light and power?
Yes, this is just talking about low light and power's obligation to funding our liability. Our employees have a contribution to the HA, but it's in the defined contribution section. Casey would know better than me. I think you're in a hybrid, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, so he makes and Megan, they make a contribution to the defined, so the hybrid is part pension, part,
So this
401k.
this 109,000 that's overfunded is not coming from the people that that are in that program, that's coming from Lowell Light and Power.
Yes, these are our funds.
So how's, I mean, so I'm assuming we're matching some funds that the employees put it, I mean, so,
It's just, you don't say, there's some match,
There's a match for the defined contribution.
the fine country, but the pension is just our, it's ours, so what, how we
so,
got here?
so that 109,000 only applies, it's Lowell Light and Power's contribution, but it only applies to the people that are in the hybrid.
No, because MERS does not care about
Okay.
individual division fundings. They care about, again, MERS doesn't necessarily care, they care about this funding percentage, which is the total pension obligation of Lowell Light and Power and the city combined.
Okay.
And when I say pension obligation, it's our, as an employer's obligation, not what the employees will fund into it. So it's just our money.
Okay, so it wasn't our money that, I mean, it's our money total, it's not just the money that goes to the hybrid. Because again, I'm looking at it, if you go back, so I'm looking at it, you know, why is it putting the 109,000 in the hybrid, and why is it not putting a portion into the hybrid and a portion into line 01 of the accrued?
So what they do is they determine a minimum annual employer contribution per division. So there's certain things that they do evaluate per division, but as far as an overall liability, we only have one collective liability.
Okay.
So what they do is through the valuation, and we can sit down and really take a deep dive. It's really riveting reading. But happy to sit down and show you, but they do give, in the valuation, they give individual fund performance, and that's used to determine, so each fund or each division has annual required contributions to continue to fund that division, plus to amortize any unfunded liability over a certain period of time. So every year, MERS will send us something that says, every month you need to make this contribution to the 01 division, and you need to make this contribution to the HA division. So we make two separate payments.
And so we've overfunded the HA at 109,000.
Mhm.
We could we say, you know what, put that 109,000, put it towards the 01 light and power, and reduce, and it's not, what, a percentage, you know?
So what we're recommending and what our plan is to take that we're gonna say $100,000. So we're gonna take that $100,000 and we're gonna move it into the surplus division, not the 01 division. And the biggest difference.
Plus is the one we
Just created. And if you remember, we created the surplus division because by creating the surplus division, you chop off years at the end. So just like if we were to put that into the 01, the regular pension division, you would get this firecracker. It would reduce our future, immediately upcoming minimum contributions, but all of our calculations would still be based on being fully funded by 2030. Do you remember 20? I don't remember, a 20-year amortization. I think we have 17 years, so I don't remember the exact date, but if it sits in this division, what's that?
Hopefully I'm still around.
But if it sits in this division, it's going to factor into your required minimum contributions, and it's not going to expedite the duration of funding. If we move it into a surplus division, those count towards our total funding percentage, because you can see, our total liabilities factor in, and this number that's hidden is a city contribution to their surplus division. We budgeted $150,000 this year,
to put into our surplus division. So those count towards your total funding percentage, but they don't factor in to individual division required minimum contributions. So essentially, under one lens, you factor it in as the overall funding. Under another lens, when you look down at what we're gonna be required to pay next year, it's not contributed. So it has the effect of allowing us to determine when we want to apply that money to the O1 division. So if we, hypothetically, we're gonna be paying down our unfunded, we'll talk O1 right now. We're gonna be paying down our unfunded liability, so reducing that liability. At the same time, we're gonna be increasing our surplus funds. Hypothetically, you get $1 million of unfunded liability in O1, and you have $1 million of funding in the surplus division. Your payments in that O1 division are still going to be based on needing to pay that $1 million over the original amortization period, which is, we'll call 2040. So I don't remember exactly the date. But at that point, we can merge the two. We always have control of when we want to throw those surplus funds over into it, and poof, we now have no unfunded liability. So that's the idea behind the surplus division, is it gives us the power to determine when we want to use that to fund an unfunded liability.
Terry, how do you determine what you guys put in the surplus, Division 10, and what the city put in the surplus? Do you have your own account?
We have
That
our
one
own,
says the Division 10, which the general is the city, right?
it is the
So
city.
you'd have your own surplus division?
Yeah, and this doesn't reflect it because this was as of December 31, 2021.
Oh.
We had not established a surplus division
Okay,
at
yeah,
that
I just
time.
wanted to make sure that.
Yes, so we,
Oh,
yeah, when we
Be like
did,
S2 or something, but.
yeah, there'll be, I'm assuming S2, and it will, what you do, when we established our surplus division, we created direct links.
Okay.
And it's only, you have to link that division to another division. So our surplus division is only linked to the O1 division and the HA division.
Yeah.
City's S1 surplus is only linked to the Division 10. So that's how they keep things
Yep,
separate.
okay. I just didn't see it up there.
So the plan is to move the $100,000 to the surplus division. Ultimately, it shortens the funding time versus reducing annual contributions. Again, there's some other things. Why we're doing it now, and I'll get into this, I'm trying to avoid some of the timing things because it's really lengthy timing. But essentially, we're looking to have something determined by the end of, and any funds reallocated wherever they need to be reallocated. Like I said, we're planning as of now to move to the surplus division. We need to do that by the end of the calendar year because all the valuations fall on the calendar year. The 2022 calendar year valuation will dictate our fiscal year 25 required contributions. There's just about 18-month lag, and that's why we're moving now and trying to determine, again, if we move those funds now, it will factor into our required minimum payments starting June 2020 or July 2024. So it's a long way out. So that's why we spent this last couple months evaluating what to do with this and why we're looking to do something before the end of the calendar year.
Charlie, are you then looking at how do I reduce that? I don't have $109,000 overpaid. Are you gonna try to reduce that so you're more on plane, or it doesn't really matter? at
We
this point?
just make whatever the return. So
Okay.
the other caveat to that is they have already determined our fiscal year. They've already determined and told us what payments we need to start making in July 2024.
Okay.
So our required payments for 2024, you can see, are right here. If we move those funds, we really need to be making contributions up here. So we'll be taking, I don't wanna say a shot in the dark, but they won't give us firm numbers because this is not approved by an actuarial scientist. And it's only for estimate purposes. So what we would do is we would move the money and then our required contribution would be here, but in fiscal year, starting in July 2024, we would actually make contributions up here to keep pace with this line up here.
Why are the, both scenario ones the same line?
There is no different scenario. There's with the surplus and without the surplus, and I didn't quite understand why they did that. We only asked for 2 scenarios, and they only gave us 2 scenarios, so I don't know if it's a software modeling thing or,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean, what it is if you're not fully funded, your with surplus and with your out surplus are actually different lines, but since this is technically fully funded, they trickle along together where.
If we didn't create that surplus fund, those lines would look very different.
Yeah,
We would have more lines.
Yeah, if you look back at the documents that I think I know I shared with the 01 division planning and looking at the different scenarios, they've got with surplus and without surplus. And essentially it's what's your funding percentage if you factor in that surplus, because that's ultimately what that goal is, to merge surplus with a division. So what's your funding percentage and where are you funded at with that surplus and without that surplus? Well, we're not using these funds, the surplus, to fund any HA or hybrid, so it's going to follow along. Where you would notice the difference is any fund that is sub 100% funded.
Okay, you were saying before that the surplus can help us end sooner, right?
The 01 division.
Right, okay.
Yeah, this is fully funded and we're just gonna keep making the required payments. Theoretically, we continue to make the required minimum payments. We'll always hover at, there's a lot of actuarial assumptions involved, so that's the caveat. We'll always stay at 100% funded. So the idea is let's build the surplus so we can pay off the 2.5, not the already funded amount.
Yeah. Based on how you have
Right.
the HA set up, we should never see the percentage funding ever 57.9. Like you have an 01. The HA should always be funded at 100%.
Theoretically, yes,
Because
it
we
won't,
started-
but
Within points.
it won't because we'll get to hear the next things. Oh,
Yeah.
I forgot to put this in there. So what this would do is, so this is our baseline this is back to the 01 division. Here's our baseline and our funding percentage, duration, annual contributions. You can see we're talking much bigger numbers here. What we did when we talked pension funding is we said, give us a scenario for 8-year funding, 10-year funding, 12-year funding. Again, everything they do is amortized out to 2040. So theoretically, if we only continued to make the payments that they told us, again, theoretically, we would be fully funded in 2040. The strategic goal is to expedite the funding of the pension plan. So what would that, this year we put $150,000 of excess contributions into the budget. So that's this line. That would take us roughly to that 10-year funding strategy. So if we continued every year essentially to put an extra 150 on top of this blue line, it's going to take us fully funded by 2032. If we take this extra $100,000, it actually puts us for 1 year, so just 1 year, it would put us for this year ahead of the 8-year scenario. So you start to see the impacts on the 01 division and the big liability by moving the funds here.
So really what this would do is it would kind of allow the baseline, by putting in the surplus, then the baseline can end 6 months early. Because we have 100,000 in the surplus, so we're not gonna use it to change the rate, we're just gonna stay with the baseline, but then the baseline, if that surplus always has the 100,000, then essentially gonna end.
Yeah, you move to one of these, you move to one of these other scenarios. These are just annual surplus division funding. You know, the delta between here and this line is if we made that contribution to the surplus division, here's when we're fully funded. You
What
make,
if we do that every year though?
yes, that's every year. You get
Right, so that's what
one,
I
you
mean by
do.
just like the six, if we just did it this 1 year, it's just ending the blue line 6 months early.
Yeah.
And if we do that every year, it's gonna keep pushing it up.
Yes, I get what you're saying. Yeah, that's it, and that's why, you know,
And your argument is that that's more valuable than having a reduced payment for the next few years.
that's been the strategic direction of the board.
Mhm.
I'm not as gung-ho to get 100% funding. For one, it's chasing a unicorn. As soon as an assumption changes, you're no longer. As soon as you
It looks
underperform.
good for us to have actually some unfunded line,
I mean, it helps. I mean, there's,
because it makes us in a sense look
Yeah, I mean-
attractive, if somebody like wanted to try to buy us out or
yes,
something.
if some, unfunded pension liabilities are a very big deterrent to buyouts. Because they typically have to fully fund that at purchase. I don't think we're at risk, but yes, there's some, I see a lot of value in improving our funding percentage, but maybe not racing to the finish line. Racing to a much better position, which again is why we budgeted $150,000 this year. If we move this other $100,000, it takes us to about a balance in that surplus division of $250,000, which is really going to start moving the needle on being able to chop years off the end. So, and the plan is to continue to budget for annual, what we did is we had the 8, 10, and 12, because every year at budget, we're gonna look at the budget and go, how much extra can we fit in? Some years, we may get all the way to the 8. If we get all the way to the 8-year funding level for 1 year, it takes a little bit of the next year, we may have other expenses that we fund the extra amount to the 12-year. And the goal is to move that funding level to somewhere between 8 and 12 years versus 18 years to be fully funded. So we're looking at chopping between 6 and 10 years off of our funding period.
Charlie, what is that percentage that kind of keeps some years off your back? 60?
60% is where if the full fund dips below 60%, I believe we have to file a corrective action plan with the state. I've got lots of thoughts on some changes that MERS has made, but topic for a different conversation for a different day. I have to get my soapbox out. So, unknowns that we still have, due to the timeliness, the timelines associated, like I said, 2021 valuation we received in the spring of 2022. It determines our contributions, minimum required contributions for fiscal year 24. So there's this big lag. We don't know what the impact is going to be of a down market this year. It's going to have a big impact on our funding percentage. We don't know the impact of MERS policy changes. Again, they implemented, without getting into the weeds, they implemented a dedicated capital gains policy this year, which does not position us well for market downsides. And I had extensive conversations with the CEO over it, and she acknowledged all of my points and said we still don't have an option. We still need to buy down the assumed rate of return. And then we don't know what the impacts of deviations from the actuarial assumptions are going to be. So there's still some unknowns. But we know that if we leave it there, it's a $10,000 savings for 5 years. Does that really move the needle when you're talking about annual contributions of $250,000 a year on the 01 division? So we're making, call it minimum contributions, $275,000 a year to pension. Just saving $10,000 a year. Is saving $10,000 a year more important than chopping years off and funding the surplus division? If it is, then that's a pretty significant shift in the board's strategic approach on this.
So I'm sorry,
No, you're fine.
I'm gonna be very ignorant. So, this is regarding, this pension is regarding all of our employees that are not on the hybrid, correct? Or,
No, the hybrid has a pension, has a defined benefit component, so this impacts, this doesn't really impact any employees, this only impacts our obligations to fund their retirement, but it's our obligations to fund employees' retirements in the pension division and the HA, the hybrid division.
okay,
But it's just the defined benefit portion of the hybrid plan.
and that's, so what, so I see this, so what happens to this plan? Let's say in 2 years, we have huge growth and we have to employ 3 more people or whatever, and
No impact here because they all immediately go into a defined contribution and we pay our liability in real time there. So I'm part of the defined contribution plan every month.
so this is really for employees before a certain hire date.
Yes, somewhere around 20-ish. Yeah, because the hybrid division started in 2012. I don't know when it was closed. I keep looking down there hoping.
I wanna say
2019-ish?
2019, yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry, I just.
No, that's fine. So, we also have more future considerations. Plan is to move, even with all the unknowns, the plan is to move that $100,000. When we receive our 2022 valuation, our funding levels will be different. So we'll have, because of all the unknowns, and our recommendation is to move that money because it's still always our money. If we get our 2022 valuation and go, well, that was a bad idea, we can take $100,000 and move it up from surplus right into the hybrid division and end up right back where we are. That's kind of one bookend, but what we'll be able to do is, once we know the full, it's kind of a catch-22. We can't know the full impacts until we move it, but we want to know the full impacts to know how much we should move. So you can't know how much to move until you move it, but you have that flexibility to move wherever you want. So one thing we could do is we would finish the year below 100% funding at the hybrid level. We could see how much underfunded we are. We're $6,000 underfunded, $10,000, $50,000 underfunded. We could budget for and include contributions in our regular budget to improve that. We could move money from the surplus division back in. We have flexibility.
Question,
Yes.
just to clarify, that surplus division, let's say, energy market prices went through the roof, and we cannot borrow from that or take from that surplus fund back to the general fund, it's always within the
It's always
retirement fund.
Yes.
Is that
Always with MERS.
one time a year you get to do this option?
I am not 100% confident in that answer.
Because if you were a little leery about moving to all of it, would it be a partial move and in 6 months you could do another? I don't know.
I would, so the goal is to have whatever we're gonna do, move it before December 31, so our next evaluation reflects where we'd like to be. Excuse me. Joe. Pizza for one. So we always have that flexibility, so we could dig in next year, get that valuation, and say, hey, let's just move some of those funds back. I think even if we finish less, which we will finish less than 100% funded most likely, just because the market has done. The combination of the market downturn and MERS's timing of implementing a dedicated gains policy, we're going to finish, we move this money, we're going to finish under 100%. I don't want to create this illusion but we always have the money available if we want to go right back. My argument at the time would probably be, so what? We're slightly underfunded. We're really underfunded elsewhere. Let's look at everything in totality let's look at our O1 division, our HA division, and our surplus division in total and dedicate funds, because again, ultimately, any additional funds that go to these individual, my argument is any additional funds we make above minimum annual contributions should, to keep in alignment with the strategic direction that we've set forward, you put it in the surplus division and decide what to do with it in the future by chopping gears off. It's not about, we can absorb slight deviations year over year in what our minimum contributions are gonna be, especially at the hybrid division, when you're looking at somewhere between $20,000 and $40,000 a year compared to our O1 division, which is $250,000 north a year. So,
Are we, receiving interest on that surplus?
so it's invested.
Okay.
So it's not interest, it's invested with MERS. That's one of the actuarial assumptions that is a
Okay.
sticking point. They used to be really high, 8.5%, I don't, they assumed actually, so what they're doing when looking at your unfunded liability is factoring in all of the actuarial assumptions. Most of your pension's unknowns. We don't know how long people are gonna live. We don't know future salary increases. We don't know what the stock market's gonna do. So they have these actuarial assumptions that actuaries, or actuarials, I don't know what their official title is, yeah, go in and it's a science-ish. Very qualified-ish. But they come in and say, yes, we're gonna plan for 20 years, for 40 years, based on these assumptions. Because they don't wanna say your money's not gonna earn you anything. So they actually assume 7%. So all these numbers are based on a 7% assumed rate of return. If we stay below that 7%, we're gonna watch our unfunded liability grow, because some of our liability funding is not actually realized dollars. It's anticipated gains on future investments. So don't want to throw out terms like monopoly money, but it's future dollars. It's future dollars that are kind of being evaluated.
Do we have anything that says that we will never drop below 90% funded in the HA, or no, we never made any commitment that? So because I would look at this as I would never want to get to the 57 mark we did in MERS, but I would never want to get below 90% under a different plan, so.
And I would just ask, I guess not, I would say, let's look at everything and, we have one, it's all how you want to carve up the pie.
Right.
How do you want to carve up your total unfunded liability?
Mhm.
I personally would be content with, I would be perfectly content if our hybrid division was funded to 0%. If our O1 division was funded to 100%. So,
That's what I'm saying, so how do you keep that balance so you don't
and that's
get in
what,
that same predicament that now I have to try to make up $2.5 million from our predecessor?
yeah, but yes,
That's a
that,
lot of money.
yeah, that's where, and that's the bookend of the
Right.
story, is obviously we're never gonna let it
I'm
get
gonna have to deal with it
100.
with the city again coming on up too, so all that's the same.
Yeah, so, but yeah, it's you wanna manage the total liability, and our biggest focus is on the 2.5 million, for sure. That's where we spent all the time here looking at it, is how we fund this, and that's where moving it into the surplus division is good, because if the board says we're not comfortable with how far that dipped, because it's an unknown. I truly, and let me tell you, they won't commit to the first dang thing. They won't even give us numbers behind these graphs. They're not gonna make any forward projection on what the market impacts of this year are gonna be. So, yeah, we have that flexibility. If we get our valuation next year and it dips below a comfort level, we now have another conversation to say, how do we wanna improve that? Do we wanna pull funds out of surplus? Do we wanna take some of the excess contributions that we're making to the surplus, redirect them to the hybrid? We have flexibility once we have the full picture. We just can't get the full picture unless we move the money.
Yep.
So,
Again, I mentioned earlier, it does not require local governing body, which I just remind the board, if it did require local governing body approval, I would have to carry it to city council, because we're under one umbrella, all official governing body decisions have to be made by the city council. So, wanted to share our plan, provide an opportunity for feedback, have you all understand what our thought process was, but it's kind of a two-part process, and unless there's some crazy, some very crazy strong opposition to carrying out the plan, then we really don't have the full picture till we move the money, get our valuation in June-ish, and come back next June-ish and talk about how we want to go, and how we want to proceed with the surplus and the funding level at that time. So that's all I had on that one. Any other questions, comments, anything?
Okay, let's move on to Lowell Rotary Club benevolence request.
All right, so included in your packet is a benevolence request from Rotary for the holiday lighting competition. I think the board is all familiar with starting in 2019, I believe. We partnered with Rotary to promote a lighting competition. And again, we'd like to do it again this year. Rotary would like to do it again. The competition's been well received by the community, staff, and Rotary. I believe the first year there was going to be a contribution made based on how many participants. Since then, we've kind of said, hey, we'll do a flat donation. I think the last 2 years it's been $1,000, a flat donation of $1,000, and we will coordinate marketing efforts and promoting efforts, and it's been a good program so far, and it supports our local Rotary. Our local Rotary does great things locally. So it's money that benevolence funds that would essentially stay in the community to help a civic organization further their mission. Again, the letter's in your packet. They just asked for a donation. I think some of that is, I think one year we might have exceeded a standard donation, but I think in recent years it's been $1,000 benevolence donation to Rotary for it. And again, the letter lays out kind of how the partnership would work and how we would work together on this. But again, benevolence request, and I am a member of Rotary, I will refrain from making a recommendation on this request.
They don't request a specific amount, are they just assuming we're?
I told them that I would advocate for the $1,000.
Okay.
Because I think one year we did, I wasn't here.
22,000 something.
Yeah.
2,500.
500.
Yeah, one year we had unused benevolence funds one year, so they didn't want to shoot too high,
Right.
but also didn't want to shoot too low. It's kind of said, frame it as a donation. This is something that, it's not new. It's a kind of a reoccurring event, so it's really down to what the board would be comfortable donating. Again, our policy does say, and I should have included a copy of our policy. I apologize, I normally do. But I think we're all pretty familiar with it. It's a $1,000 cap with a $5,000 total budget in a year. And typically we have the Chamber and Rotary are the two that come back, and this is one of the reoccurring events that we've done for the last few years.
I would entertain a motion, and I would stick with our policy of $1,000.
So moved.
And we have support?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, it's been moved and supported. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carried. general manager, so,
Do we still like him?
do we still like the general manager?
Yeah, do we still like him?
Well, I don't know, question for you.
Depends.
So, this is the form that I used last year, and so here's my plan, is to give each one of you this, and with business card, which has either my cell phone, which you can text, or you can put it on our email. If you have specific questions, so again, my intentions will be to hand, besides the board filling this out, so what I'm really looking for is from each one of you, board members, of what other questions you might like to have on here. I will combine, put that together, then get that back to you, and then I'm going to hand those out to key people in the company. I still think it's important to have, because for the most part, our evaluations are kind of like 12 times a year, our monthly meetings, and, we have other contacts, but I really treasure or value from the key heads of departments and everything in the company, that I want to then, once I get back from you, if you have other questions that you'd like to have on there, I would put that on there, and so it would be basically for the board to fill out, and then for key people such as Ryan, Casey, Megan, Julie, Lisa. I mean, it gets down to a good share of our employees. I might pick one lineman, and I might pick one other office staff person, but I think it's, again, I value their input, because if you look at some, like, how does the GM communicate with staff on a regular basis, and there's other questions, there's some questions on here. What would you recommend the manager change about his approach, or what do you like? I value, and I think Charlie does too, that insight from all employees, not just the board. So, and I really don't want to take up a lot of time in this, because it's just for you guys to just get back with me, because so my intentions would be to get this filled out and create this form, get it back to, once you get the information to me, I'll create the form, get it back to you, get it to the key people, because I would like to do the evaluation, will be on next month's agenda. I'll also have Charlie send you the APPA numbers of what, last year they did, what the mean is, what the average of utilities, and we'll go from there and determine what we want to do at our next meeting. So, and talk to Charlie, we will do that. That's on the request of whoever we're interviewing, but it will all likely be in closed session. And I know that we just get busy, and again, it was done November, so it's of last year. I know it's supposed to be done, our fiscal years ends June 30th, but we'll make it retro, and whether we're cutting his salary or giving him an increase, however that goes, and
Just don't know how that.
just,
hold it
so again, and if you just send me your feedback, and we'll get going on that. And we'll go from there. That's all I have
I
on
like
the,
this, thank you.
have on the review discussion. So we'll actually, I mean, we'll go into the actual review, next month. So the sooner you get those to me, the sooner I can get them back to you so you can be thinking about it. Also, in our communications, I'll have, what Charlie's current salary is, what the automobile, what other benefits that he has that's above and beyond our normal benefits package. And we'll go from there.
All right.
So, do you want to copy that?
No,
Yeah, okay,
no, I'll leave it up to you guys.
okay. Anyway, that's it, so moving on to informational items.
Sort of performance data. I think one interesting note in performance data is actual across all classes change year to year. Current month, previous month, we saw reductions. And part of that's multiple influences, but a lot of it's weather driven, I'm sure. But what's interesting is the increase in actual revenue. Small rate increase in last January, we'll play into that, but I think we're really starting to see the upward pressure of the PCA. The PCA included in the manager's report, there's the graph. The PCA jumped pretty good last month, and the revenue obviously followed that. So acknowledgement of the hardships that could potentially cause for our customers, but ultimately it's no new money. The PCA doesn't result in new margin for us. It just makes sure we stay whole through elevated or suppressed market prices. Again, cost per kilowatt hour. I'll stop on investments in cash a little bit. We did see a pretty good jump in investments in cash, which was about $100,000. About $65,000 of that was in the Huntington account, which is the majority of our actual operating. It's where we operate out of, basically. You'll notice a couple changes. One change is I'll just stand up. Oh, heck, is it this one, Megan?
Yep.
All right, yeah, you can't see all the colors, but so this number here is a newer investment. It's our Huntington Bank investments. Currently, all of our investments, previous to this month, all of our investments sat with Huntington Bank in mortgage-backed securities, but Megan and I have been, as I prefaced earlier, we've been watching on a weekly basis options for additional investing options, and we landed on investing $250,000 out of the Fifth Third investments, which was actually had been returned. It was returned principal from the mortgage-backed securities that was sitting in a money market account. We pulled $250,000 out of that and moved it over to Huntington Bank with a 4.15% one-year treasury bond, right? We'd have waited one more week, we could have got 4.2, I think. But we pulled the trigger. Like I said, I shared earlier, the thought process behind that was this time next year, they're still anticipating upward rate pressure. It's hard to know. It's always an interesting yield curve when your short-term returns exceed your long-term returns. That inverse return curve is not particularly encouraging from an economic standpoint, but it's something that we will leverage. So just off that $250,000, it was over 10. Do you remember? It was two. I don't remember the details. I remember looking at it, and we were definitely very happy. I think it was over $10,000 in interest on that.
Charlie, Fifth Third Bank didn't come up and offer you something? You took almost 25% out of what you had in their investments, and they didn't seem to bat an eye on it?
No, one of the things that Megan and I have changed over the last 2 years is wanting to diversify our relationships from an investment standpoint. So one of the things that I don't pat myself on the back very often, and just started this year. It didn't look like it was gonna be very fruitful. So we brought in Huntington Bank to understand what options they had and how we could use their services. We've got a relationship with them. We did invest in a short term. Told Megan, I just want to create the relationship because we don't know what's going to come down. Well, the first investment made us $70. Granted, it was sitting in a money market account at Fifth Third and wasn't making much. We're making less than that, but we invested in, just to create the relationship and open the door with Huntington Bank, we invested in some school board bonds, I believe is what it was. Very low interest, but it opened the door, and because of that, we've developed a relationship, and it's been helpful now, but our goal is to not be, I don't want to say stuck, but not only have visibility into one bank's investment options. And one thing that we found out is the difference in the mortgage-backed securities, and that there are different ways to carve that pie up, and some provide more upside, but potential downside, and we're very, everything we do obviously is in per state allowable investment policy, per our board adopted investment policy, which mirrors the state's. But one of the things was guaranteed principal, and the things that we invest in are guaranteed principal. So, we wanted to just kind of diversify. And I don't know what all we used to have investments with Huntington, or was that new?
We did with Huntington when we got a large IPA payment that we didn't have to pay for a couple months. We invested it with Huntington. That was a couple years ago.
Yeah, so we dabbled a little bit, but yeah, I don't think we ever even heard from Fifth Third on moving the money.
Wow.
Yeah, so, and there's probably, it's
working for you.
it's a treasury bond, so a lot of people have that access, but again, it's that relationship piece that we wanted to continue to cultivate a little bit. So that's where we ended up laying out.
Do we have things split up? So like in our checking account, we don't have any more than 250,000, like that's FDIC insured, or?
No, it's different rules. I don't know exactly how Huntington does it, but where I'm at previously, they have obligations to protect our funds, and they get pledges typically from outside entities for a value to them.
Gotcha.
To essentially privately insure, but they have obligations to protect our funds.
Okay.
All right, we'll roll on. Again, at aging, very similar story. Delinquent balances, that did see that high jump in the balance of inactive accounts last month. Again, I highlighted that was one commercial customer that left the service territory, and we continue to work with them, and they've since made at least one additional payment, and that balance is starting to dwindle quite a bit, and we'll see some additional reductions there, hopefully.
They made a payment today?
Final?
No.
They made two very equal payments, and the remaining balance was very close to those first two equal payments, so I was very optimistic that we were gonna get
Nope.
half of it?
Nope.
Not even half.
Very random amount. Not sure.
At least it's an amount.
It's at least it's an amount.
Yes.
I appreciate your optimism.
Zero followed by point, so.
Very random amounts. That's
Yes, it's interesting. I like
At
this.
least the linear trend's still slightly negative, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
despite that big spike in the end.
Yeah, and I don't want to promise too much, but we have looked at available balances for write-off next year, and we're sitting in a pretty good place. Again, I cannot promise year over year
Right.
improvements. At some point, we're going to smack the basement floor. So, other than that, again, similar graphs. Again, I'm still amazed at continued adoption of the portal, auto pay. Auto pay slowed down a little bit this month, but again, we saw an uptick in paperless billing. So there's value in each of these. At some point, again, I say every month, we're going to plateau out.
There's only so many customers.
Yeah, and there's only so many customers that it fits.
We don't know where that is. We know we can't get
Getting
it.
close.
Yeah, I would say, I've gotta believe that at some point, I'm hoping it's 60-70% at some point for portal registrations at least. But we'll see where it goes.
Just do a logarithmic fit and see where
Yeah.
it goes out at.
Yeah, other than that, I will hand it over to Ryan for the outage report.
Not too bad this past month, a few different locations, a tree issue, 505 West Main actually had a building fire, so the fire department wanted everything shut down in the building, just got them out of an abundance of caution. Turns out it was a ballast in one of the exterior lights on the building, so just wasn't a big deal. It was after hours for most of the customers, I believe anyways, so not a big deal there. Did have a bird issue at 2050 West Main, and then another similar issue at 2186 West Main, which was really nearby. It was a small branch that had broken out of a tree and landed in just the wrong or right spot to cause problems. That has since been taken care of, and the squirrel guard was applied, which would have helped prevent that too, because it would have closed the gap a little better on letting that short things out. Gulliford, I don't know if many of you have noticed the vines in your yards or anywhere around town. They have grown this season more than ever you could imagine.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
The bittersweet vine.
Yeah, it's just amazing that those vines grew up high enough on the pole at that Gulliford location where it actually caused problems at the transformer level on that pole. Totally
Wow.
amazing. A couple spans off the road in the woods, so isn't something that we really would have went out and inspected for. Probably should, but we didn't. That's not too major. And then the 28th Street one was just a single customer, just a broken porcelain cutout, common item. Since changed, squirrel guards were added to the pole, upgrades to that. Still this month, we were 99.986 available. Last year it was 99.978, so slightly better than last year. So still doing good.
What can you do to kill those lines? Nothing, you just chop them off, pull them out.
We
You
chop them off, pull them
They
off.
just throw them
Sometimes we will spray a little Roundup on the root bases around the poles if we happen to have it with us. But other than that, it's just cut them all down and try to pull them out. Stay on top of it.
So they don't go real down deep part in the root base.
It goes way down all over, spreads out
Yeah, it spreads
everywhere.
out really fun.
Yeah, I think they were cutting some trees in one spot and they cut the trees and they didn't fall.
Because of the lines were all.
The vines were holding them up, they,
15 or 20 trees standing straight up and they wouldn't tip over. It was just amazing. The vines were so thick on the lower level, when the trees were all removed and chipped up, we actually took the mini excavator out there because it has a hydraulic thumb attachment to be able to grab things, and we use that to grab the vines in big wads and just pull them out and load them in the dump trailer and get them out of there.
It looks
Totally
great,
amazing.
and it looks great. I asked Ryan to carry me out to where they cut, just so I could see, I want to see what the new chipper's doing, so.
Yeah.
I really want to see it in action, but, wanted to see it, it looked really good. I didn't have before pictures, I didn't know what it looked like, but I could imagine. And there's still a couple spots where you can see the vines have been cut off at the top and bottom, but they've intertwined, they've wrapped around wires or cables from whether telephone or something. And you get a picture when you see a vine size of $50 just twisted up around a cable drop or something.
Yeah, they're invasive too.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Most of it's satisfying to have that grabber pulling off, because I've pulled out so many roots by hand.
I tell you what, that was more satisfying is tying those trees to a winch and not having to use any manpower to haul them out and watch them disappear into that new chipper. So there's a lot of stuff that's very satisfying with that.
We've changed the game on how we do tree trimming. It takes a lot of stress and load off the guys, because, I mean, you could do a job in 15 minutes that would have took 3 or 4 hours, because you'd have to chunk it up and try to struggle it out of the vines to get it to the other smaller chipper. This thing is really awesome.
That's one of the reasons I want to go look at it. I asked Ryan, how long would this job have taken a year ago? Much longer. That's, essentially, and it was the wear and tear on the people too.
Yeah.
It's not
We don't want
It's
that.
just,
hot work.
it's great that we're finding ways to introduce efficiencies everywhere we can, so that's wonderful.
And definitely reminds everybody the appreciation they have for the board and the support from the board and purchasing the new chipper and,
Have you ran into the tree with the vine on it and just shoved it through the chipper, so you're doing that too?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so
Sometimes
you
the vines are-
ran into a wire that was on that stupid line.
No, no, we try to keep an eye out for that, because then that messes up the knives and the chipper drum, and we don't wanna hurt
But
it.
I wondered how, yeah, I was wondering how that would.
It would probably be scary. I mean, that thing is not gonna mess around, it's gonna take things.
there's not much that's not gonna get sucked through.
I can show you later of them trimming a big dead tree that's full of a vine on the trails.
I didn't include that, including pictures of the assistants there.
Can you connect to the projector at some point?
We should we should bring a video maybe next month.
Yeah,
He's got one.
we'll get some good ones.
I'm saying, yeah. If I was quick, if I had any confidence in my ability to get that on the TV quickly, I would say, yeah, but.
Cause an issue with everything else.
I was gonna say, but I think it would be good to share, video, because it was a significant investment from the board in our equipment and the labor savings. The labor savings and the efficiency, even if it took the same amount of time, the savings of wear and tear on our people is worth every bit we spend on that. But you get the added savings of quite a bit more quickly
And just,
disposing of this.
You can pass it around.
Yeah.
I mean, that's-
Well, maybe
that's-
now they're
that's
probably
the
looking
thing.
for more vines to tackle it.
Well, I tell you something, Harry and I have talked about this, and we've talked about doing a Christmas tree recycling
Ooh, yeah.
with the chipper.
To make it smell nice.
Yes. Well, they said we just park chip it all up in the truck and park it in here, and we come in on Monday and know you'd be disappointed that Christmas is over, but, all right, we'll jump into income statement. I hate to sound like a broken record, but, pretty much the same story is everything's trending like we wanted, except for purchase power. I will touch on purchase power briefly. We budgeted $4.6 million for purchase power. That was about $300,000 more than the most conservative budget projections we were provided by NPPA. I think the most, we asked for 3 or 4 models from NPPA. The highest budgeted amount they showed us was, I believe, $4.35 million. So we saw a need to pad those numbers. New projections are projecting north of $5 million. So it's, like I said, don't want to sound like a broken record, but I cannot understate the disruption in the energy markets right now. We're seeing natural gas prices spot prices are coming down to, I don't want to say good levels, but I don't know where they're at now, but I'll say they were down in the 5s. A couple years ago, we were talking 250 in MMBTU. We're happy at 5 because it's been $9 in MMBTU. I don't want to say encouraging, but what we're seeing the variance in sales revenue start to shrink down. A lot of that's driven by the PCA catching up to historical, the last 8 months of elevated purchase prices. We anticipate continued pressure on the PCA because as we still have a certain dollar amount to recover, but we anticipate selling fewer kilowatt hours for the remainder of the year. So what we need to collect per kilowatt hour is seeing an upward pressure. So we're still anticipating the sales to continue to pick up. We also budgeted for some slight additions of larger loads. I'll touch on my manager's report a little bit, but with Grand Rapids Gravel Company coming online, an industrial expansion that's not been publicly announced, and then the cannabis grow operation where those numbers should continue to track well. The purchase power is not gonna track well. I wish it would, but we are gonna continue to control the things that we can control and manage our expenses everywhere we can, but, the board should be very, very thankful and but the board should be very thankful in the aggressive hedge position that we found ourselves in with the support of MPPA, because if we were more exposed to the market, it would be even bigger. But our entitlements are also running over budget. The only project that we're invested in that is consistently producing power under our assumed base power rate is Campbell, and Campbell has its own challenges, and Campbell's going away. So expenses associated with Bell River have been very high due to environmental compliance issues with cross-state air pollution rules and NOx allowances. Natural gas prices have driven up the fuel costs at AFEC and the CT project. Again, CT project is economically dispatched, so anytime it's running, it's beating the market at least. So we would be in a worse position without the hedge position that we're in. Again, I'd like to see net income start to creep up some. And it should continue to, but again, purchase power is very challenging right now. That's really all I have for the income statement. Happy to answer any questions, but it really focuses a lot on that purchase power number. Capital projects, again, I'll touch on some of the progress that we've made on some of those projects in the manager's report. Happy to answer any specific questions, but we're really marching along, just kind of doing a lot of preliminary work with capital projects. We are
Dollars cash immediately. It's a good feeling to know that my family will be taken care of if anything happens.
I said I wanted to see the watch.
I should say,
Coming up, Barry, it's for you. Supplement your,
Funeral costs are rising.
yeah.
There we go.
is that what it said?
Yeah.
You should.
Barry made a joke, I hope I'll be around. I thought I missed that part of the man. It's a cold joke.
Recommendation for
Kids
so.
I'll say the biggest movement that we've seen, and again, I'll touch on a capital project, or in the manager's report, is actually while we were sitting here, I got an invoice for access control and progress billing on the camera system. So we're seeing some of those projects get wrapped up. We put a new roof on the middle section of the office building that was budgeted for. That was another facility improvement capital project. So again, we are making good progress on capital projects, but nothing that stands out that's something to necessarily draw specific attention to. Moving on to the manager's report, we had a very busy month with MPPA. If you'll, the one thing that I will highlight, I think we will do a board training session at some point, is Casey and I will tag team a new capacity structure by MISO, and they're dubbing it seasonally accredited capacity instead of a single capacity requirement for a year. They're going to break it up and have individual requirements per season. We'll get into some of those details, but we're still learning. It was approved maybe a month ago and supposed to be implemented for next planning year in the spring. So even the experts at MPPA, subject matter experts at MPPA, are scratching their heads a little bit trying to figure out exactly what all the implications are. Talk about the Kalkaska CT project. That's a 2-into-1 structure, or structure where there's 2 turbines that funnel into one generator. There was issues with one of the turbines that ultimately resulted in about a 90-day forced outage and about $1.4 million fix to be shared amongst project participants through the project fund. So we keep funds at MPPA for them to manage stuff. Potentially we'll have impacts on next year's budget because, like I said, we got two of the same turbines that, both spin the same generator. Well, we had problems on turbine B. There's a pretty good chance that we need to evaluate turbine A. So that could have some implications next year. Let's see, I won't, MMEA, I won't dwell on too much, but want to thank Craig for joining Megan, Julie, Casey, and I in attending the MMEA Fall Conference last Thursday down at Firekeepers. It was a really good program. MMEA always does a great job pulling those together. Next year we're going to be in Marquette, so a little more logistical challenge to get to Marquette, but I'm pretty excited myself.
Take the company helicopter.
Exactly. I think somebody asked me already.
Yeah,
I can't remember what it was.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had a company
I
helicopter.
said something about the private jet, and you said, no, the helicopters are much more versatile.
Yes. But on Friday, we also had one of our 2 all-member general membership meetings, and I was voted to serve as the vice president at MMEA. So I will serve as vice president with Ted Seiler as the president, who is executive staff at Holland. So
This is kind of a big deal, guys. I mean, our guy is on the, vice president on the board, so congratulations.
So does that,
hey,
no. So does that, do you then move up the following year as president? Some organizations, you start out at this and then you're vice president, and then the next year you go to president, or I don't know if this organization acts that way or not.
that's how it's you, the positions you use. Ted was the vice president this year, and he's rolling into the president. I'll be honest, there's been so many retirements. It is really tough to say what's normal at MMEA.
Okay.
MMEA the board has a selection committee to identify candidates to fill vacancies. And typically, it's the current president and 2 previous past presidents. The current president had to serve a second term because who was supposed to be president retired. And I can't remember who's on the selection committee because everybody has been retired. I think Tom Tarkowitz from Marshall stuck around an extra year to participate in the selection committee. So there's been a lot of retirements. But yeah, typically, I would anticipate this would lead to serving in the president's role. One project I'll draw attention to that's new, a couple. I believe this will be the last time you see dock addition on the manager's report. I hadn't talked to Ryan about it, but I know last month I reported there's a couple poles that need pulled, some concrete. I've seen an invoice for the concrete come through, which means I assume the pole's been pulled. We haven't directly talked about it, but that's a very small detail that Ryan's got more than under control, so we'll be pulling that out moving forward. New item is Circuit 207 capacitor. This was a budgeted item, and we have placed a PO to order the material for this. It's a 24-ish week lead time. I want to thank Casey for doing due diligence efforts on that. We really leveraged his engineering expertise and appropriately cited it, paired that with Ryan's knowledge of the system, and we have a pretty awesome plan pulled together. And it'll all come together in the spring, which is great timing because it's right before next summer where we run the risk of paying power factor penalties because we have power factor requirements associated with transmission level peaks. So we want to make sure we have our power factor where it needs to be prior to hitting those peaks. And this is another challenging item because our load's always changing. We're seeing load growth, and the delay in getting good data is very challenging. We still don't know our power factor performance for calendar year 2021. It's really tough to manage power factor when you've got a 1.5 to 2 year delay, but Casey's on top of it, Ryan's on top of it. We've had some capacitor bank issues at the substation that they've teamed up and really drove to the ground, and I think we've resolved those issues, knock on wood, somebody please. But we've, they're on top of it. We're doing everything we can, and this is a good project that will, for one, help us be prepared for the King Milling expansion. But when the King Milling expansion happens, we're probably going to be doing a very similar project next fiscal year. We're also looking at adding a small capacitor due to the power quality issues or power factor issues coming out of the Grand Rapids Gravel Company, but that will be something that they're fiscally responsible for due to an adverse impact that they have on the overall system. The other ones are kind of more related to just overall system power factor improvement. Want to thank Holland for their assistance in getting Grand Rapids Gravel Mine primary metering set up. Ryan, Grand Rapids Gravel Company reached out to us. They said we need a primary metering set up, get it hooked up now. Well, we looked at it, it was going to be $20,000 and a 30-week lead time, I believe. That might have been 36 weeks.
It was a long time.
That doesn't work. Reached out to Holland, and Holland said, yeah, we can help. I don't know what the final price is going to be, less than half, about a third from a material standpoint.
Congratulations, guys.
But it's money in our customer's pocket, because
Right.
you know that's direct savings that they will realize. So yes, it's us, it's Ryan, Casey, everybody getting creative and serving our customer.
And it's great that you have that networking with these other municipalities. You have these resources a phone call away, you know, and you, I mean, you, how shall I say that? You didn't know that in a vacuum. You know that because you're creating relationships with these people, and that's really important.
Thank you, and that's exactly it. You know, Ryan's got contacts at Holland. I'm Ted Seiler, who's serving as president of MEAs at Holland. So Ryan's got people to call on. Casey's networking from a generation standpoint. It's a definite priority for the utility. And what makes it even better is, you know, we don't hook a primary meter up every day. We don't. It's not something that we touch on a regular basis. So I asked Ryan, I said, wait, see if they'll send a person with them that does it. Sure enough, they sent a meter tech that came out and didn't walk through, but was on site as a resource for our crews to learn from. I went out there to thank them and wanted to see how things were going, and by, I think 10 o'clock I went out there and I barely got to see them do anything. They're wrapping it up, and I got out there to see, our guys got to see the meter tech from Holland directly connected. That they brought one of their meters so they could hook it up to all of his software, check everything, check phase angles, check voltage, all through a computer interface. And it was really, again, it just makes that relationship even more valuable. So I definitely want to thank Holland. They did it was a huge help. Again, I mentioned that the office roof repair has been completed. I want to provide an update on the line shack. Everybody got my text message. We'll barely have a quorum. Didn't count, if you can participate, lovely, but obviously you have other obligations as well. So I did get confirmation from Tina, Perry, and Craig that their firm commitments to a special call meeting next Monday at 5:30 in council chambers. But the update as of right now is I delivered the board's feedback that I shared with everybody to the city council, and then city council took a motion was made by the mayor, and I believe seconded by our liaison, Mr. Salzwedel, to draft a resolution that would ultimately sell the line shack to Greg Canfield. It ended up passing with a 3-2 vote. I'll remind the board that the Copper Rock proposal originally received a 3-2 vote. It ultimately ended up in a failed attempt at the sale. It does take 4 votes in the affirmative to sell real property. So that 3 votes that we received for the draft of the resolution is not sufficient to ultimately sell the property.
And I will say that I reached out after the council meeting with the mayor and told him that I thought it would be prudent to have a joint meeting together, because this issue, in my opinion, could result in the council and the board, we have a good working relationship, but if the property that doesn't get sold, I can see that there certainly could be a strain on that relationship. So again, I've asked to have a joint meeting to see if we can iron out some of our differences and go from there.
I think it's a fluid situation too. So, I want to highlight, again, there's the PCA. You can see the upward pressure on the PCA. That was a big jump. A lot of that is anticipated reduced sales, and there's about a 2-month lag, so we're starting to get some of those July expenses and the summer expenses baked into our PCA. The IIJA and IRA, want to start providing some more updates on that. Some of the information we're coming out of that's becoming available on the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act is not encouraging for us. I've been very optimistic on this program. And I'll do a more detailed, my plan is to do a more detailed presentation on some of the different programs in the future. But we're starting to see that the programs that are going to be handled through the Department of Energy, the DOE, they're really looking to make big impacts with single projects. And some of the projects actually have to be applied for through the state. It's not even that we have the authority to, or MMEA has the authority to apply. We have to convince the state to apply on our behalf. That's pretty discouraging. They're also looking for large grants, $20 million plus grants to come out of the DOE. The state we're focused in on a program, it's section 40101D, but it's resiliency projects, and there's a state funded, or a state piece. There's issues with the state having their local match. States didn't budget for their local match because they didn't know to anticipate it. So the state has delayed its resiliency funding for 2022, and the anticipation is they'll roll out 2022 funding and 2023 funding at the same time. But the state has indicated that they don't want to, they want to keep things simple. Simple projects, simple applications, simple to understand, and very few quantities of projects. They're looking for 6 or 7 projects. There are 40 municipalities. It's appearing that our best opportunity to receive some of these funds is to aggregate projects through MMEA or through somebody. Problem is I think, and this is my thoughts, I've not had any conversations, but if you look at one of the biggest deficiencies amongst municipals is the municipals that don't have AMI yet. So I would anticipate an aggregation of AMI funded projects may make it very challenging for us to receive some money. I'm still optimistic. We've got a good presentation from Power Systems Engineer, our partner in pursuing grants, and I want to share some of their, when we have time to do a grant presentation, board education type of presentation. There's some money that is becoming clear that we don't need to pursue, but there's still some money that is potentially more fruitful. The IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, is another big act big law that was put in place. It does open up direct funding opportunities for or direct pay incentives for tax exempt entities like us. So pre-IRA developers could claim a 30% investment tax credit on solar, essentially reducing the cost of the project 30%. Well, we've always had to partner with somebody, and we don't own any solar. We have to go through a third party developer, and we don't necessarily know how much of that 30% ultimately trickles down to the end PPA price. So there may be some opportunities still not clear, but there may be some opportunities for us as municipal tax exempt entities to invest in some resources. Another interesting piece is there's going to be, what we're being told is significant rebates for electric vehicles. So it may not directly impact our vehicle purchasing strategy, but we could see a more rapid adoption of electric vehicles through the investment or the Inflation Reduction Act. So again, we're still working through time of use rate programming, but to have that in place with the cost of service update that we're doing with UFS, we're going to evaluate using the line extension policy to add a rebate for electric level 2 at-home EV chargers, determine that rebate based on the margin that we would receive off that additional load, which is essentially how we determine what we're willing to contribute to somebody's new electric service. We take, what's the anticipated margin on that service, what's an acceptable return on investment, and that determines how much money we're willing as a utility to put towards somebody's installation. It would be a similar program with EVs. So good news is we were a little bit ahead of the curve when it came to time of use and some of these items that will help support an appropriate adoption or the most effective adoption of electric vehicles. I want to highlight the S&P review. So I want to highlight Megan for a minute. She's had some pretty daunting projects hanging over her shoulders for quite a few months between the cost of service update, that was very labor intensive in terms of just the data collection. The audit is always a very busy time for Julie and Megan. And then we got sprung with this Standard & Poor's surveillance review, which was part data collection, part advocating for ourselves. So Megan and I worked together on advocating for our credit risk position with people that I did not know to what extent they were familiar with municipal electric systems. So we wanted to make sure that there was an education and an understanding with how they were going to review. Ultimately, they reaffirmed our A rating and gave us a stable outlook. That is, in my opinion, about as good as we're ever going to be able to get. We're just because of the natural limitations. I'd encourage everybody to review the rationale that's included in your board packet. I want to highlight the good, but want to focus on one statement that will result in some changing approaches. They made a statement that there's a lack of regularly updated capital and financial planning. And that was a negative, slightly negative, I don't remember exactly how they worded it. And
what happened is we update our 5-year long-range financial plan with the cost of service update. We're obviously in the middle of going through a cost of service update, and that will produce a new 5-year financial plan. So we're dealing with a little bit, I won't say an old, but assumptions have changed. So one outcome, and I still stand behind our shift away from a firm capital project plan. You know, we had this 5-year plan in place. It was called the 5-year plan, and I think after about 2 years, it was quickly made apparent that a 5-year plan is not a 5-year plan. So we still continue to operate from long-range capital planning, but the risk matrix to help guide our capital investments that we look at annually very much disagreed with their assessment of a lack of capital planning. They don't care about my opinion though, and they made it very clear that we were only essentially allowed to dispute factual statements, and their opinions are their opinions, and that's what they're paid to do. All things considered, the change we're going to make is a more frequent engagement with UFS on our long-range financial plan. So we're, you know, Megan updates the long-range financial plan every year, and we review it and look at it. So I would say we do update it, but to bring in an outside service to check assumptions, to make more substantial changes on an annual basis is something that we've already actually talked with UFS about. It's really cost effective to bring them in. They've got these models. They work with, you know, they're the national leader in rate development for municipal electric systems. So they're very much in tune with other utilities in bigger landscape type pictures. So there's a lot of value, and it's very, like I said, very cost effective to bring them in on an annual basis so that we can fill what S&P has identified as a potential deficiency. So with that, the last thing I'll bring up, I want to thank Julie for attending the MERS conference. That was a bonus. We did have a great public power week, but we're also working with HR Collaborative, which is our HR consulting group that we've partnered with to update job descriptions, make sure we're in full compliance, and we're reviewing and updating our employee handbook. The plan, we've got a contract reopener with the union in the spring, and there's always changes to the handbook that come out of that. So the plan will be to do a single board presentation and ask the board to take one action in the spring or summer, and we'll incorporate these changes from HR Collaborative into other changes. There's nothing glaring that, hey, we need to deal with this right now type of items, but it's been reorganized some and and there have been some things that, best practices that have been identified that should be incorporated into our handbook. So we're just trying to do our due diligence and not take for granted that we've stayed up on all changes HR related. We had a recent retirement of our part-time HR specialist this past year, so we're just trying to make sure we continue to stay in a good place and make sure we are staying ahead of the curve instead of falling behind and finding ourselves out of compliance with things. So with that, also, I guess I keep saying I'm done. That's the fourth thing I said I'm done. But we did hire, I want to bring attention, if you see a new face in the office, we've hired Faith, who is a high school senior, to come in and work a couple hours in the afternoon to help the office staff. They've been shouldering quite a big workload lately, and I think this will be a good help, good assistance to help minimize disruptions. This person will come in and help us get Faith, I shouldn't call the person Faith, will come in and help process payments, help keep things moving that people have to stop and go help a customer at the front, or things that she can help get ahead. So we're very optimistic that she will be a great asset. I've met her, talked with her. I think she's going to hit the ground running. Good move. So other than that, got a couple pictures.
First picture is just, this is us, or this, us, them, Jeremy, heating up the tap to go to Grand Rapids Gravel Company so we could test the meter. And then the next picture I thought was a pretty cool picture that I snagged. I get the photo credit on this one, of our crews providing assistance to the chamber with the dismantling of the summer concert series stage, so. I didn't use the picture that Ryan tried to hide from. He saw me taking a picture and ran behind a truck.
I
So,
didn't have my yellow shirt on, it didn't blend in.
again, I included the S&P Surveillance review, and then we're down to scheduled meetings.
So our next regular board meeting falls on a national holiday, November 15th. Or a state, I should say a state holiday, it's opening deer, firearm. I'll be here, but I don't know if Ryan, other.
Soon enough.
Because I was gonna say, geez, I'd like to get our linemen, well, that.
Good luck.
Good luck on November 15th. With that, board comments. Start with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to Monday's meeting with everybody. I am going to make an announcement that I had missed the intent of what I think the city council was supposed to do. Our job was to sell the line check, not care about the investor. That can be the four other boards' job to make sure there's adequate parking and the buildings meet criteria and code, go back to planning commission. So I'm going to get that back to the board, that's the direction we need to go in, is sell the line check. What development gets on there, if they fail, that's up to them once they go to the other planning commission. So I'm looking forward to that, and hopefully we can come out of there with some resolve, even if it's not Mr. Campfield. Who is that? How do we sell that piece of property? So I think that's what we need to get back to, so.
Good.
It was great to go to the MMEA conference. One thing that I was thinking about is, what am I gonna say to y'all about it when I come back? And there's a lot of information there, and I can't convey that to you, my fellow board members. And I guess what I'm asking is that, we've got a lot of decisions that we're going to be making as the industry rapidly changes. I have no doubt Charlie can educate the board and tell us, what we need to know. Yet on the other hand, I think in support of him, we need to raise our level of knowledge so these decisions can be made more easily and less work for Charlie. So I think as a board, it's important to support him, and we need to do that by digging on ourselves a little bit more, I think.
Okay. Anything else?
Nope.
Keenan.
I would like to say kudos to the Lowell Light and Power Dream Team that we have. Megan and Julie knocked it out of the park. For Pete to sit there and say this is really unheard of at the level that these ladies, he sends them questions and she just launches it right back to them. Rock on. I don't want this to be your opportunity to leave us, but you are very valuable. And you and Julie, just knock it out of the park. To impress Pete, that's unheard of, because he's usually, just cut and dry and walk out the door. The rest of the workers here at Lowell Light and Power, I'll tell you, and I told you guys 100 times, I carry you guys with me when I'm in Detroit or Lansing for Blue Cross Blue Shield. And it's still to this day, because management come and go. And when they say, well, what's about what's Lowell all about? When I tell them about Lowell Light and Power, they just about fall over. They can't believe what we have going here. So kudos to everybody that I'm very proud to be able to carry you with me. With that, that's it.
Andrew?
So, yes, congrats again on the really boring audit. It's just good to keep doing that over and over. I mean, it's been several years of very good audits, and I appreciate the work that you're putting into that. Other than that, I'm just looking forward to hear how the school tour goes from Roger.
I was
In
gonna
the next
say,
few days, so.
you have, your son's joining us on Friday.
Mhm.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
You are welcome, you're welcome to join us if you can. I know you're a very busy man.
Yeah, I don't know if I can. I think if I could, I'm not sure if that school would let me. I think only certain parents will let me.
And Roger probably just wanna.
Yeah, he might.
Maybe you don't have enough paper bags to go over that, you know?
But to that same extent, I should have said so, I feel like I forgot a lot this go around. We actually had a Lego team from Ada Christian. Their coach is one of our customers, and the coach reached out, and Casey pulled together, we spent about an hour with them last Wednesday, and yeah. It was a very engaged group, it was a lot of fun, but I really enjoy
Very cool.
when, school age kids get to come in and see what we do, so look forward to Friday.
And so Lego team and you went and.
Yep.
So you had a pretty good time, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for an hour.
About an hour, maybe, yeah, it was a small group, so, kind of opens up opportunities to
Yeah.
Casey ran the generator in test crank mode,
Mm-hmm.
so you get to hear some of the noises, and
Yeah.
it's safe, and obviously Casey's very aware of safety issues, and make sure the place stays very safe, and very important for that, but yeah, we were able to do a little bit,
Made
more
like noise to
expanded.
Very
be.
cool.
Yeah, to make
Yeah.
an impression, right?
Okay, first on, I have a whole list of things. So now that I've missed the voice, so, TV 13. So if everybody had a chance or not, I think you could probably go online and see that. Charlie did an interview. I think he did a great job. I don't think I heard one or and
They edited those out.
just did a great job for Public Power Week. I think if you go on Channel 13, you'll be able to go and see that. When Tina was talking about, how proud she is of Lowell Light and Power, I have to say the same thing. And so again, I'm on several different committees. I'm on the LARA, which is in charge of the trailways, and we had a cleanup on October 1st. But there was a couple big trees that we shouldn't try to handle, and we shouldn't do. And you come back and you mention it to Charlie or Ryan, and I mean, that month, this is the Saturday, that Monday, they're out there taking care of that, a couple trees, and that's what I had on, that I passed around here, and it just puts a lot of pride in us as a board, us as a company, us as all of our coworkers, because they're not only keeping the lights on, but they're doing a service for the community and Lowell. We certainly wouldn't want, with the trails, we certainly wouldn't want to have a big limb come down and fall on somebody. So anytime that we've had, something like that, we've mentioned it, and I mean, they're like there. And they're there not begrudging it, they're there all hands in it. So, can't say enough great things about all of our employees. Harvest Festival, we had Harvest Festival last this last weekend, and Jeremy was there representing the line crew, I'm gonna say, driving the truck and getting the pumpkins. Lisa and her husband were there all day. Was a little chilly, went and got Jeremy said, they don't need a heater, they don't need a heater. And I went, how long are you here till? 4 o'clock? I'll be back in 5 minutes. So we've used the torpedo heater and different other events and brought it down. And the wind got going, and our pop-up tent wasn't the only one to go flying. There was quite a few others that we were grabbing and trying to save or save from hurting anybody. But it was a great event. I mean, I saw we brought picnic tables there, and kids, Heidi's provided us with small pumpkins, and this year, and I think they did it last year, they got stickers, so they're not paint, you don't have the mess of painting and everything, but they could take all these stickers and put eyes on, mustaches and different things. So it was a really neat event, and it was really neat that Lowell Light and Power participated. Great for the staff, having a clean audit. And also, that's where I think all of our staff, I talked about the linemen getting right out there, but our office staff. My wife is involved with several things, and she had, in the past, have had a flyer go to our billing and talk to, I don't know if she talked to Lisa or Emily, whoever she talked to, and it might have been Megan, talked to him and said, yeah, I think we can do that, and it was 15 minutes later, a call back and said, oh, we've got a problem. We've already promised an XYZ company, another company in the community, to be able to put that in there. But I think but again, this was Megan, our office staff, they came back with a solution. They didn't say, oh, sorry, you can't do that, we'll have to do some other time or something. They came back with a solution that this, whoever wants to, they'll use, they need one side of a page, and Teresa's group will be able to use the other side. And so that's the great thing about, I think, Lowell Light and Power and all of our staff. When something arises, they just don't go, oh, sorry, we can't do that. They find the solution. And I can't say enough great things about the whole organization, from the board all the way down to the lowest man on the totem pole. Everybody is valued, and that's my 2 cents. So with that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn. Well, you want to stay here some longer, or what? So moved.
Support.
And support. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried.
9:08.
So